Chapter 168. Chapter 168, An Ending. Jiang Susu's unexplained disappearance was eventually revealed. The entourage of more than a dozen guards who followed did not discover anything was amiss until daylight the next morning. It was only when they had not received any response to their numerous calls did they discover the dead body of the maidservant inside the carriage with nary a sign of the young miss. The guards returned panic-stricken to the Jiangfu to report to Jiang Quan what had happened. Jiang Quan was so incensed that he was on the verge of collapse. However, the guards' report made it evident that Jiang Susu had killed her maidservant and escaped while posing as her. No one was to be blamed, since the people Jiang Quan had sent out confirmed that it was true. Jiang Quan couldn't say anything else besides cursing the damnable girl. Nonetheless, the fact that the young miss of a Grand Fu fled with her whereabouts unknown was not a topic that could be discussed. Therefore the guards could not be allowed to survive, and so Jiang Quan commanded that these people be dealt with. Perhaps those guards were aware of their future unjust treatment, because they used unknown means to expose the matter before their deaths. Consequently, in no time at all, the whole capital learned that Jiang Quan had lost the Fu's second Mississippi. The entire Jiangfu was on the cusp of a storm these days. From every street and alleyway, the topic on everyone's lips was somehow related to the Jiang family. Jiang Quan was furious, but it was difficult to stop people from gossiping. Xiao Xiao had taken Jiang Ruan back to the Jining Wangfu. Otherwise she would have gone to the palace to keep Empress Dowager Ida company. Ultimately, the whole debacle made him feel as if the rug had been pulled out from under his feet, and Jiang Quan had no control over the situation at all. Thus, Jiang Quan doubled his rage at Hong Ying, who had just had a miscarriage. Hong Ying was already in poor health, but Jiang Quan beat her up every day, intending to torture her to death. Knowing there was no other way out, one night, Hong Ying took her own life by swallowing gold. Thus the Yinyang fell out of favor yet again and died just like that. Jiang Quan didn't even have a coffin arranged for her, but rather, he instructed an old female servant to roll her inside a worn-out mat and throw it into a mass grave. It was the fall of yet another beautiful woman. However, it was hard to say if it was something to sigh about or not. Xiang Xiao Yuyun. Falling like jade or withering like a flower. It is a metaphor for the death of a young woman. Except for the reclusive eldest Yinyang, there were no more concubines left in the huge Jiangfu. Jiang Quan was in a state of shock and frequently stood in the yard in a daze. The gentle voices of women chattering in the past stood in stark contrast to today's cold and desolate atmosphere. It was increasingly clear that the entire Jiangfu had gradually collapsed. The people that were sent to look for Jiang Susu had been gone for a long time without sending any news. In the end, the one who was more anxious than Jiang Quan was Jiang Chao. Jiang Chao and Jiang Susu were born to the same mother after all. Jiang Susu had always been doted on since childhood, so it was only natural that Jiang Chao loved her dearly. Despite his indignation at Jiang Susu's rash behavior, he turned to Xianli for assistance, who then dispatched a group of people to search for Jiang Susu's whereabouts. He was now useful to Xianli, especially since Xianli had always presented himself as a wise monarch who went out of his way to recruit talented men. As such, he did everything in his power to help with the search. Indeed, Xianli's men were far more resourceful than the Jiangfu's servants. At the very least, the people sent out by the Jiangfu had not yet discovered Jiang Susu's whereabouts, yet Xianli's men had already informed Jiang Chao, "Young master, we have discovered the location of second Miss Jiang." Jiang Chao was practicing calligraphy in his study at the time. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't calm down and his handwriting was crooked. When he heard the report, his hand shook, and a large drop of ink fell on the snow-white Xian paper, causing large ink flowers to bloom. "Where is she?" he asked eagerly as he raised his head. The guard appeared slightly embarrassed and hesitated to speak. Suddenly Jiang Chao's heart was filled with a bad premonition, and he no longer cared about anything else. He grabbed him by the collar and yelled, "What's going on?" To answer young master, the guard was taken aback by Jiang Chao's attitude, but could not keep the news a secret any longer. The scouts returned to report that second Miss Jiang was kidnapped by mountain bandits, and is currently being held captive in their hideout. Has already been several days. Bang! The writing brush slipped out of Jiang Chao's hand. The top-quality writing brush made of white jade and weasel hair hit the floor, making a piercing and distinct sound that echoed in the quiet room. The guard sensed the surrounding atmosphere had become stagnant and dreadful. He lowered his head and stood frozen in place, afraid to look at Jiang Chao's expression. The terrible silence lasted for an unknown length of time before Jiang Chao gnashed his teeth and ordered, "Get the horse ready." "Young master." The guard was stupefied. When he caught a glimpse of Jiang Chao's face, he couldn't help but stare blankly for a moment. There was so much hate and madness in those slightly gloomy eyes that it was almost certain he was set on destroying everything the next second. But while his eyes looked terrifying, his face was very calm, almost to the point of madness. Then he said, "Come, follow me to save 2nd Mississippi." The sunlight seemed to be obscured by the thick shade of the trees deep in the mountains, leaving only a few slivers of sunlight to shine down. The rundown hamlet resembled an abandoned pearl embedded in the mountain. It was already worn and had turned black, but it clung to its position tenaciously. The door opened with a creak and a woman emerged. The woman was dressed in a man's garment made of coarse sackcloth that had been altered to fit her. Her trouser legs were still too long, exposing a pair of white calves, which were covered in purple marks. The same was true for her arms and neck. The clothing was so large that even if it were smaller it would not fit. Her appearance was exquisitely lovely, like that of a fairy, but at the same time she appeared aged because she was too haggard. Her stunning looks were further diminished by the presence of thick bluish-black color under her eyes. She was naturally beautiful, with fair skin and a slender figure, and with a little effort she could have outshone all the other beauties. Unfortunately, this woman now resembled a drab peasant woman. Carrying a basket in her hand she walked out the door, then walked to a small stream not far from the hamlet and squatted down. There she took out the clothes which reeked of alcohol from inside the basket and began painstakingly scrubbing them. Her tender and delicate hands were already rubbed raw from washing, and they had also become red and swollen from being immersed in the icy river. She was clearly not used to doing these things. Nevertheless, she kept scrubbing the clothes slowly. This woman was none other than Jiang Su. Around her, there were many women like her washing clothes by the river, all dressed in rags. Some were attractive and others less so, but all wore an identical expression, a kind of ashen face and numbness with blank eyes, as if they were accustomed to this kind of life. The sun rose in the east but did not bring any warmth. Jiang Su continued to wash the clothes. Her eyes no longer reflected the disdain and mockery of the first few days she was here, but instead displayed a kind of numb obedience. She had been living a hellish existence recently. The women in this village were all men's accessories and tools for venting. They usually had to wash, cook, sew and mend the men's clothes. They would be punched and kicked if they did not do a good job. Mountain bandits would never be considerate and caring towards women. The women would be beaten if they didn't satisfy them, regardless of whether they were young misses from a prominent family or girls from modest households. In this hamlet, every woman had suffered abuse. However, this was not the most agonizing part. The most tortuous part began when night fell. It was then that they had to serve multiple men throughout the night, which was probably worse than being a prostitute in a brothel. They've seen me. None of them should be allowed to live. She only cared about venting the pain she had endured over the past few days, ignoring Jiang Chao's stare. Jiang Chao gazed intently at the red mark on Jiang Su's neck, staring with a somewhat vacant expression. Jiang Su had become this way. Even if he were to take her back, her body was no longer pure. The oil lamp had long since burned out. It was obvious that for a long time no one had been here to refill the lamp with oil. The air reeked of death and decay. The woman was very old. The gray hair on her temples was caked with oil and grime, and the hair behind her head was a tangled mess. Her body also seemed to have not been washed in a long time. The filth seemed to have encased her body like armor. Only from her pair of large eyes could one see her former splendor, but that was already in the past. Xia Yan had no idea how long she had been here. There was no one to talk to, no fresh fruit or vegetables. It was just stale food, a filthy blanket and a leaky roof. As a consequence, she alternated between a manic and sane state. Even though most of the time she was insane, she was sober now. She had no idea why. But today she felt a strange unease in her heart that she couldn't quite explain. Unexplainable despair filled her heart, as though something big was about to happen. Her hands scratched the ground futilely with their mud-covered nails. She heard the door creak open. Abruptly, Xia Yan raised her head and then observed a man enter the room while holding a lighter before closing the door gently behind him. She had not seen such a brilliant light for quite some time, and so she became temporarily blinded by it, and was unable to see the person's appearance. Huakuizi. Not sure what to call it, so I just put it as a lighter. It's made of flammable material such as rosin, nitrate, or paper money and inserted into a bamboo tube and lit. The man sat down and set the torch aside. The flame gradually settled. Xia Yan began to adjust to the new light and heard a familiar voice. Mother. Xia Yan trembled as her eyes welled up with tears. She lived in this place day after day, being bullied and beaten, as if she had been forgotten by everyone. She had no idea her son would appear in front of her now. She opened her mouth, but her throat only made a dry sound as she had not spoken for a long time. Jiang Chao looked stunned when he saw Xia Yan's appearance. Then a flash of rage flashed across his face. How could they treat you like this? At first, Xia Yan had been waiting for a visit from Jiang Chao, but upon recalling Chen Feng's prediction that a nobleman would kill her sooner or later to silence her, she had also felt a sense of animosity towards him. But now that she had seen Jiang Chao, she no longer resented him. After all, this was her son, so she figured he'd come around to her side. All of the mistreatment was due to the initiative taken by wicked servants, because at the end of the day, Jiang Chao would always acknowledge his mother. But Xia Yan didn't realize. If he truly cared about his mother, how could he have waited for so long without even asking after her? Even if Jiang Chao was busy during the week, it was not a big ask to send a servant to inquire about her situation. These people dared to act outrageously because Jiang Chao did not pay much attention to Xia Yan, just like when Jiang Ruan was sent to the rural residence to be bullied. Jiang Chao was not stupid. He knew that sending Xia Yan to the rural residence would almost certainly result in bullying, but he was unconcerned. This person's inner selfishness had reached an extreme. Despite her viciousness, Xia Yan was competent as a mother. Everything she did was to pave the way for Jiang Chao and Jiang Susu. Unfortunately, both siblings were self-centered and did not care about their mother in the same way. Jiang Chao looked at Xia Yan and said, "Mother, Mimi is dead." Xia Yan was stunned and looked at Jiang Chao in disbelief. However, Jiang Chao went on. She fell into the trap set by others and enraged father. Father wanted to send her to the ancestral temple to be a nun. She flatly refused. She took advantage of the situation by fleeing during the night and was caught and taken to the mountain bandits' den. There she was insulted and thus she killed herself. He said everything calmly, but every word pierced Xia Yan's heart. Xia Yan let out a scream, but she was unable to say anything else. Only 2 lines of tears continued to fall. "Why did you not protect her?" she asked with great effort. "I protect her?" Jiang Chao let out a sneer. "Shouldn't mother, the mother of my sister and me, protect us? Do you know how Mimi got caught in someone's trap? Mimi wanted to seduce Jining Wang into becoming her concubine. Does mother understand why Mimi, a daughter, wanted to be a concubine? Because of mother's bad reputation, no one had proposed to marry Mimi. This marriage between that slut Zhang Ruan and Jining Wang was granted by the Empress Dowager. Mimi, however, was neglected because of mother's corrupt morals. Mother is responsible for her death today." Xia Yan was stunned and stared in disbelief at Jiang Chao. With regards to the matter back then, clearly she had been set up by others, but while others might doubt her morals, Jiang Chao was her own son. How could he say such a thing? She had no idea that Jiang Chao couldn't raise his head in front of his colleagues because of her ruined reputation, which was constantly used to vilify him. Jiang Chao accused Jiang Susu of dying because of her today. He was in fact venting his rage. He blamed Xia Yan. "No, it's not because of me," Xia Yan said. Jiang Chao shook his head. "That's not important now, mother. I have promised Mimi that I will avenge her. Now that Jining Wang and Zhang Ruan have a higher rank than me, I can only avenge Mimi if I advance in my official career." When he looked at Xia Yan, a strange light flashed in his eyes. "And mother, as long as you exist, I will always have a reason to be criticized. and I will never be promoted any higher. It took Xia Yan a long time to grasp the meaning of Jiang Chao's words. She looked at her son as if she did not recognize him and asked, You want me to die? Mother loves us siblings so much and I want to grant Mimi her heart's desire. As such I can't think of any other way to make it happen at this point. Jiang Chao spoke in a muffled voice but without remorse. Mother is smart and wouldn't want that slut, Zhang Ruan, to trample all over your son. Unfilial son. Xia Yan took long rattling gasps. Get out. Jiang Chao shook his head. The only reason I came this time is because blood is thicker than water and he wished to make Mother more comfortable. Booty have to give up, because Mother does not appreciate my kindness. It's just that, in some cases the process is unimportant but the result is, isn't it? Are you going to kill me? Xia Yan's eyes widened in surprise. No, Mother will figure it out, I'm sure. He smiled slowly, revealing his white teeth, but it wasn't his usual bright and cheerful demeanor. Under the spotlights he looked like a crazed beast. The beam in this room is high enough, Mother. One life in exchange for an innocent reputation. Mother knows which one is the most worthwhile to choose. He continued. Then he simply left the building. Chapter 169. Chapter 169 Affection. The weather grew increasingly chillier. After it rained all night, the air was much fresher by the next day. Bai Ji pushed the window open. Raindrops from the previous night still clung to the branches outside the window, their beads glittering and translucent like jade as they slowly fell to the ground. The unique scent of earth after a rain slowly permeated the room. Jiang Ruan freshened up, had breakfast, and then stepped toward the window. Lu Zhu rushed into the room and after placing rose pastries and tea on the table, blinked at Jiang Ruan, and suddenly whispered, Miss Foreign has passed away. Rose cake. Jiang Ruan responded with him, and sat in a chair by the window. The rose pastries that Lu Zhu brought looked very tasty. They had a hint of pink, making the pastry look incredibly moist and lovely in the morning sun. She twisted a piece of the snack slowly with her snow-white fingertips, displaying her unique charm even more. Second miss has died, as has fifth Yang, Lu Zhu continued. 3 people had died in quick succession, but Jiang Ruan's expression remained unchanged, as if she had anticipated this ending. Her eyes seemed to flash with boredom, but the look was too brief for anyone to notice. Wang Ye's spies witnessed it firsthand. Lu Zhu quickly continued, concerned about Jiang Ruan's reaction. Second young master took his men to find second miss, but he ended up killing second Mississippi. Then, when he returned home, he informed master that second miss had been abducted by mountain bandits and had committed suicide. As for fifth Yang, she swallowed gold and died of her own volition. Lu Zhu pondered, yet Foreign's death was somewhat odd. I heard that second young master went to the rural residence last night. After his visit, in the middle of the night, someone found that Foreign had committed suicide by hanging with a sheet of white damask. However, for the time being, Master has kept quiet about this matter for unknown reasons. Jiang Ruan stated flatly, it's not strange. 3 people have recently died in the Fu. On the one hand, Hong Ying's death can easily be dismissed, after all she was merely a Yinyang. But on the other hand, Jiang Fu's daughter and Foreign both unexpectedly died at the same time. This would inevitably spark speculation from those with ulterior motives. The rumors about the Jiang Fu have already spread widely throughout the capital. Since father is cautious naturally, he will not add fuel to the fire at this time. Lu Zhu had a moment of clarity. This is why. But why did Foreign commit suicide? And second young master went too far when he killed second miss just to end her pain. Jiang Ruan's eyes flashed with mockery and her tone was frighteningly cold. He did not do this to give Jiang Susu immediate relief. He simply did not want Jiang Susu to be a stumbling block to his official career. As long as Jiang Susu was alive, one day she would be used as evidence and a tool to castigate him. Moreover, my second brother is at the pinnacle of his career, so he obviously had to personally destroy such incriminating evidence. Lu Zhu gasped because she had not thought that deeply about this matter. Because regardless of how Jiang Chao and his sister treated Jiang Ruan, they always maintained a united front. The affection between the siblings was genuine. Therefore, who could imagine that Jiang Chao would abandon and murder his sister for his own selfish desires? This was utterly appalling and disturbing. Although Lu Zhu came from a poor family, her experience was broader than that of Bai Ji and Lian Xiao. However, her inherent nature was kind, hence, she was unable to perceive such depraved, dark and sinister matters. She had always believed that human nature was inherently good. That said, Zhang Ruan was different because no matter what, she tended to be skeptical towards human nature and firmly believed that it was inherently evil. As such matters that others would find difficult to consider, she would naturally take into consideration. Zhang Ruan went on, as for Furan's death, it was merely due to second brother's instigation. And so, as the result of these two setbacks, it would seem that second brother has cast all caution to the wind. He has put himself on a road of no return and is obviously prepared to risk everything for his goal. I'm afraid that it won't be long before he will orchestrate something big. Pagwan Pashuai, lit. To smash a pot just because it has a crack, figure to give up altogether after a setback, to throw one's hands up in frustration and let it all go to hell. When Lu Zhu heard what Zhang Ruan said, she was taken aback and asked, "Are they preparing to deal with Miss?" "I'm just afraid they won't do anything." Zhang Ruan smiled, but it was a little cold in Lu Zhu's eyes. "I'm also curious to see who will be the winner of this round." Lu Zhu remained silent. After a brief moment, she appeared to recall something and said, "Miss, this servant heard Jean Eyre mention that Xiao Wangya will depart in less than 10 days. Zhang Ruan paused and lowered her gaze. 10 days? How is it so quick? At the same time, Xiao Xiao was holed up in his study, immersed in reports. The express horse courier from the border regions had arrived with military intelligence outlining the dire situation there, making anyone reading the report overwhelmed with stress and apprehension. Zhang Xianji's whereabouts were unknown. Guan Lianghan had been injured, and the army's morale was low. Furthermore, time and time again Tianjin's army kept frequently changing their battle tactics, thus catching the troops off guard. If this continued, the remaining troops would be completely wiped out. On his left was a map of the battle formation and some kind of way he must maintain control of the situation even from thousands of miles away. Everyone knew Jining Wang to be a young hero who commanded 300,000 genie guards, but no one had witnessed him strategize and plan a victory from thousands of miles away before. It would take him more than a month to travel from the capital to the border. Thus, for the time being, he could only write down the defense strategy and send it to the border station. He needed the troops to hold out until he arrived in person, at which point they would take the enemy by surprise. The room was deafeningly quiet now that all of the genie guards had withdrawn. He hadn't slept a wink because he'd been meticulously studying the enemy's formation, and hadn't even eaten anything till now. The door was pushed open suddenly. Xiao Xiao frowned. The tip of his nose smelled the aroma of food, but when he saw the person coming, he was taken aback. Zhang Ruan had personally come to deliver snacks and porridge. Even though she currently lived in the Jining Wangfu, the two of them strictly adhered to etiquette and had never violated it. In addition, Xiao Xiao was always stealthy in his movements and traces. He hurried outside during the day and returned at night to examine the military formation. The two rarely interacted. Zhang Ruan's demeanor was even more desolate. Every day she lived comfortably in the Jining Wangfu, but she refused to leave the courtyard. Xiao Xiao was surprised because he had not expected Zhang Ruan to come in person. She arrived by his side and placed the snacks and porridge on the table. "The osmanthus cake and chicken porridge are not too sweet," she explained. "I've tried them, they are delicious." She did everything as naturally as if she'd done it 1,000 times before. Xiao Xiao gave her a glance but did not move. "Osmanthus cake? You haven't eaten anything all day. Do you want to starve to death in your own house?" Zhang Ruan asked. Zhang Ruan always treated others with kindness and kept a smile on her face, which made her facial features appear vivid and lively. However, upon closer inspection, the smile did not reach the bottoms of her eyes, as if it were a mask and made people feel a little alienated. She rarely expressed her feelings except to those close to her. Even when facing Zhang Xianji, she always wore a reassuring expression and never a particularly unhappy one. She had a clear distinction between what she liked and didn't like, But regardless of her true emotions, she always managed to mask them with a smile. This made her expression slightly intriguing because even when she was smiling, it concealed a different meaning. For instance, right now, it was obvious that she had a smile on her face, but a certain person could see anger and displeasure in her eyes. Xiao Xiao responded with took the spoon from Zhang Ruan's hand, scooped a mouthful of porridge slowly, and tasted it in silence. He usually thought there was nothing special to eat, but for some reason he thought the food was especially delicious today. Xiao Xiao was in a good mood and finished the porridge quickly. Even the pastries he didn't normally eat were gone. Zhang Ruan was quite pleased with Xiao Xiao's tactfulness. She then sat down opposite him and asked, "I heard you're going to battle soon." She asked so bluntly, but Xiao Xiao strangely didn't mind it at all. He replied, Be careful." Zhang Ruan pondered for a moment before telling him that, ultimately, she would marry the man in front of her, regardless of who he was. It seemed that Xiao Xiao had been helping her unconditionally. In this life, she no longer trusted people easily, but Xiao Xiao was an exception. She said after a brief pause, "I will guard the Jining Wangfu for you." Xiao Xiao was again stunned by her words and couldn't help raising his eyes to look at her. Xiao Xiao had a firm grasp of Zhang Ruan's character. He had seen it clearly since the first moment he laid eyes on her. This girl was composed and decisive, ruthless and merciless, and her body was brimming with hostility. She appeared to harbor many secrets and stubbornly kept her heart hidden. She gave the appearance of being heartless, but this was not the case. She risked her life for Zhang Xing, and she was willing to become alienated in order to protect the Zhao family. She even helped Xian Pei, whom she had only met once in the palace. She was actually a very protective person, but the number of people she protected were very few. She really meant what she said today. This was a promise she made to him, and she meant that the Jining Wangfu was her responsibility from now on. "I'll protect it for you." The girl in front of him was stunningly beautiful. Her features were as lovely as a painting. Her beauty was different from that of Jiang Susu's quiet elegance. Every feature of her face was naturally exquisite, and now that she had gradually shed her childlike look, she was revealing her magnificent peerlessness. The pair of bright and limpid eyes were reminiscent of the crystal-clear waters of a mountain spring. The outer corner of her eyes had a faint curl, giving her a flattering appearance. And when she smiled, it appeared as if the glow of sunset was reflected in her eyes. Xiao Xiao admitted that he had seen countless beautiful women in his lifetime, but he could not deny that the girl in front of him embodied the fray, the temptress who causes national calamity. If she were ambitious and put her all into seduction, and she happened to meet an emperor who adored beautiful women, perhaps the country would truly be overthrown. "There's no need for you to do this." After taking a look at her, Xiao Xiao said, "Jining Wangfu will protect you. If you can't protect it, there's no need to make special efforts for this reason." If Zhang Ruan was a protector by nature, but Xiao Xiao was even more so. In the beginning, the 300,000 genie guard had no leader. Xiao Xiao was still young, and the emperor did not dare to hand over power to him easily. The genie guard became a hot potato. At that time, everyone said that such an elite troop was only loyal to the Jining Wangfu, making it very difficult to subdue them. Everyone had believed that the emperor would eventually disband the troop, and so, amid such a flurry of rumors, the genie guard had a terrible time. All the troops and soldiers they had previously crushed struck back at them when they were weakest, and it was at this time that Xiao Xiao stepped forward. He was given a mission to infiltrate the southern border and kill its leader to save the genie guard. He overturned a Wangfu for the sake of an ordinary secret guard of the genie guard. He also fought to the death with powerful officials due to the tragic death of his subordinate. Everyone knew of Xiao Xiao's protective nature. As a result, the whole genie guard respected him, loved him, and were willing to go through fire and water for him. With a temper like Xiao Xiao's, now that Zhang Ruan was his future wife, he naturally took Zhang Ruan under his wing. He did not want Zhang Ruan to suffer in vain. Even so, she had surprised him greatly by making such a promise. "No, Xiao Xiao." Zhang Ruan refused. "This Wangfu is not dispensable. This is the Jining Wangfu, the home of your father and mother. This is the place established by the former Jining Wang's meritorious deeds and pride. It represents the Xiao family's dignity. It must not be trampled upon, even if this dynasty falls. I won't allow it to be trampled, she whispered. Xiao Xiao was shocked, and an inexplicable complex emotion surged in his heart. Jinying Wangfu. When the world mentioned the Jinying Wangfu or Jinying Wang, only the rebellion of former Jinying Wang would come to mind. If a bad person had done one good thing among 1,000 bad things, he was a good man. But a good person who had done 1,000 good deeds and one bad deed would have all of his good deeds obliterated and nullified. He had guarded the Xiao family and the genie guard for so many years. The world feared his power but did not respect him from the heart. People were always forgetful. They had already forgotten who led this genie guard, who they now cursed as thieves, to fight against the foreign clans and keep the dynasty in balance all these years. The foundation laid by the ancestors became more flourishing and splendid, but those who charged into battle gradually vanished. However, she stated that the former Jinying Wang's meritorious deeds and pride were the Xiao family's dignity. Even if the dynasty was overthrown, it must not be trampled on. At this moment, the shock in his heart could not be expressed in words and he acted before he could think. He took Zhang Ruan's hand and drew her into his arms. Zhang Ruan was stunned to find herself already in Xiao Xiao's embrace. As she lay against Xiao Xiao's chest, she felt his chin on her head. "Thank you," the young man stated in a deep voice accompanied by a faint sigh. Zhang Ruan pondered, hesitating, then extending her hand to embrace his waist. "You don't have to thank me," she told him. "Since I'm going to marry you, this is my responsibility." Xiao Xiao gradually loosened his embrace, and Zhang Ruan withdrew. Before she straightened up, Xiao Xiao pinched her chin. Stunned, she looked up at Xiao Xiao only to find that the man was looking at her intently. This young man was not only incredibly handsome but also possessed rare heroism. However, he was always indifferent and lonely, giving people a sense of alienation. However, when his expression softened, the entire person appeared to be exquisitely gentle. His eyelashes were long and straight. They formed a beautiful arc as they drooped. His black eyes, which looked like the night sky sprinkled with small diamonds, were particularly striking. When the darkness of the night abruptly gave way to an endless amount of light, people's eyes were dazzled by the brightness. Holding Zhang Ruan's chin, he leaned forward and lifted his thin lips slightly. Suddenly, the air became incredibly romantic. On this chilly day in late autumn, he felt the radiance of spring quickly pressing in. The incredibly handsome young man slowly leaned over in a firm and irresistible posture. In a daze, Zhang Ruan felt her body stiffen. She had every intention of evading him, but upon seeing his dark, starry eyes, she didn't move for some reason. This young man appeared aloof, but he was actually affectionate. Despite his cold exterior, he had a warm heart. Because he was powerful, he lived his life without any constraints. In her past life she was too far away from him, and in this life, due to unexpected circumstances, she became close to him. He didn't put any pressure. Just like a cloud or a drop of water, he slowly surrounded her and came into her life. She had tried to resist, but realized there was nothing she could do. She had a tenacious temper, but the other person was not weak either. In this life, he helped her quietly while rejecting a mutually advantageous marriage alliance. He was simply not a person who could be manipulated by others. Zhang Ruan closed her eyes slowly and did not reject him. Like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water, his kiss barely made contact with her lips before he retreated. He was a gentleman after all. Zhang Ruan slowly opened her eyes, and when she did so, she noticed joy in the young man's eyes as well as his undisguised affection. The subtle emotion caused her heart to ripple but then stabbed her heart like a small knife. He was such a good man. He was so sincere and his affection was not fake. But why in this life? If she could change to her past life when she was still a simple and foolish girl with an eternal longing for love, she would be able to love Xiao Xiao wholeheartedly and reciprocate his love. But the heavens brought about unanticipated events, and Xiao Xiao met her. A woman who was heartless and cruel, who lived for vengeance and who could not love anyone. A sudden sense of dejection rose in her heart that came from feelings of self-loathing and abandonment. When Xiao Xiao saw her expression, he was taken aback for a moment. He lifted her chin again and forced her to turn her face toward his. "What's the matter with you?" he asked with a frown. Jiang Ruan looked at him and suddenly smiled. "Xiao Xiao, do you regret asking the Empress Dowager to marry me?" "I have no regrets." Xiao Xiao gave her a look. No matter how composed he was normally, facing the woman he liked, he was just like any other naive youth who was falling in love for the first time. He had never attempted to guess the complex thoughts of women, so he did not understand why Jiang Ruan had suddenly become depressed. His fiancée has always been good at hiding her feelings. For example, at this moment, he clearly sensed Jiang Ruan's sudden low spirit and disgust, but after a while she returned to her usual calm smile. Jiang Ruan suddenly wrapped her arm around his neck, drew him closer and hugged him tightly. Jiang Ruan's sudden initiative caught Xiao Xiao off guard. After a brief pause, he reached out and patted her on the back, as if to calm a frightened little animal. Jiang Ruan rested her chin on his shoulder. He couldn't see Jiang Ruan's face, and he had no idea what decision his fiancée had taken right now. This man was so kind, Jiang Ruan closed her eyes. He's so kind that she couldn't bring herself to hurt him. Since he said he had no regrets, he would never have the chance to regret again in this life. She was willing to try unraveling the knots in her heart. Regardless of whether or not there was love between them, she would never cause him to regret his decision. Chapter 170. Chapter 170, Undercurrents. 10 days later, Xiao Xiao led 100,000 genie guards to battle against Tianjin, and at the same time, General Zhao set off together with the Zhao family's 3 sons towards Shirong. Recently, there had been frequent incidents at the border caused by Shirong, thus it was inevitable that these actions would give rise to certain notions. The emperor's thoughts were hard to pin down, and so no one knew why he had decided to send out the Zhao family at this time. Consequently, there were only 3 people remaining in the Zhao family left in the capital: Zhao Yi, Zhao Yulong and Zhao Feizhou. On their own, they did not have the means to pose any threats because the 3 of them lacked military and political power. As such, if someone with ill intentions were to strike at this critical juncture, while they were at their lowest point, the Zhao family would be hard-pressed and badly affected. Luo Jingxiaxi. To throw stones at somebody who has fallen down a well / to hit a person when he's down. Jayatulani. Lit. Badly burned about the head from trying to put out a fire. Figure hard-pressed / under pressure from a heavy workload, creditors etc. However, no one dared to disobey the emperor's edict. Furthermore, the Zhao family was loyal and courageous and had no reason to refuse. Thus, they left the capital on the same day as Xiao Xiao, who was leading his genie guard. Jinying Wang had left to command this military campaign, but his yet-to-be-wed fiancée was still in his house. According to the customs of the Great Jin dynasty, when one's husband-to-be was leading a military campaign, the woman could stay in her future husband's fu. Still, the Empress Dowager took pity on Hong and Junju, and issued an edict allowing Hong and Junju to officially stay in the Jinying Wang fu. Furthermore, Hong and Junju's maiden family, the Jiang fu, had recently encountered a series of unfortunate incidents. First, Minister Jiang accidentally injured his own Yinyang, who was so grievously hurt that she died not long afterwards. Then the missing second miss was found. She had been captured by mountain bandits, and had committed suicide in order to protect her purity. In this way, a generation of beautiful women suddenly died in their prime. Although Jiang Susu's reputation had not been great when she was alive, death can pardon everything, and people are always more tolerant towards beauties. What shocked people the most was that Jiang Foran was taken ill for a long time, and eventually died. And yet, Jiang Foran's maiden family, the Xia clan, did not even wait 3 months before sending a distant relative, a maternal cousin, to the Jiang fu, which then welcomed a new Foran. Originally, people thought that after Jiang Foran's death, the last connection between the Jiang family and the Xia family would be severed. No one expected that the Xia family would personally send a new Foran to the Jiang family. In this way, the marriage alliance between the Xia and Jiang families was maintained, and many of the people who were looking forward to watching some excitement suddenly found themselves empty-handed. However, although the relationship between the Xia family and the Jiang family had not broken down, because of these circumstances, Minister Jiang was denounced by the people. In particular, the imperial censor's petitions for impeachment landed on the emperor's table one after another, every word censuring Minister Jiang for taking a new bride before the main foreign's corpse had grown cold. This was truly not something people who professed to be in a loving relationship for many years would do. For so many years, the Jiang family had stood firm in the imperial court, with a reputation among the people for being upright and honest. Up to this point, there had only been a small degree of damage to their reputation, but now with the way Jiang Quan had taken a new wife, what remained of that good name had completely disintegrated. From now on, when people brought up the Jiang Fu, what was spoken of was never that it was an upright noble family, but rather the unsettled inner chamber of a muddle-headed minister. These changes slowly infested the environment bit. Although no one was paying attention, when even the principal characters involved remained unaware, every small situation, left unattended, would eventually blow up into chaos. However, everything was just beginning. Qianliji di hui yui xue. Lit. The embankment of 1,000 miles collapsed in an ant's nest, that is, very long dams will eventually be destroyed because of the gnawing of little ants. Figure a metaphor that not paying attention to small things will lead to catastrophes or not paying attention to small things will cause serious losses. If there was anything to be happy about in the capital, it was that the previous structure of the imperial harem had been completely disrupted. The positions of 3 of the imperial concubines lay vacant, and a new group of talented ladies was gradually becoming prominent. A few ladies were already the current new favorites. Zishukir. Lit. Burn your hand. Feel the heat/figure arrogance of the powerful/ a mighty figure no one dares approach / hot, exciting or in favor. These 3 ladies were the youngest daughter of a Hanlin family, Wang Lianer, the Shu daughter of the first wife of the Yinggu Marquis Fu, Mu Shiro, and the 4th Shu daughter of the Jiang family, Jiang Dan. Hanlin refers to academics employed as imperial secretaries from the Tang onwards, forming the Hanlin Imperial Academy. When a monarch's foundation was not yet stable, the women he doted on would generally be connected to the powerful forces which supported him, and they represented the influence of whichever Fu it was. When the monarch had achieved success in his great undertaking, when nothing could shake his hold on power and his position, then he would no longer dote on these women from such illustrious backgrounds. Conversely, he would select those women without any foundation, and even those without any background to speak of, to dote on. Such women were weak and had no one to rely on. They would not set off any storms, and could only survive in the palace by relying on the monarch's good favor. From time immemorial, monarchs have always been paranoid, and only such women were completely harmless, and would not entertain other thoughts. For these 3 ladies, either their families looked good but had no real power, or they were unimportant Shu daughters not valued by their families. Thus, to the emperor they were just the right type without threat. Moreover, the 3 ladies had truly distinguished themselves from the rest of the talented ladies. Wang Lianer was best at understanding poetic sentiment and the beauty of literary works, and the emperor appreciated her as an intelligent and empathetic beauty. She had a gentle and subdued temperament, and the feeling she gave was like that of a beautiful woman passing by, holding an umbrella in the misty rain over Jiangnan. This was similar to the original impression given by Imperial Consort Chan. Mu Shiro was the most beautiful of them, like an orchid blooming in a secluded valley. However, her natural temperament was somewhat cold and indifferent, and her manner while waiting upon the emperor was just as cold. Even so, it was precisely this cold indifference which piqued the emperor's interest, and she was now regarded as the cold beauty of the palace. Of the 3, Jiang Dan's appearance was the most unremarkable, and her temperament was nowhere near being gentle or empathetic. Her initial encounter with the emperor had been a result of coincidence. That night, she had been praying to the moon in the courtyard, and every word uttered had been for the safety and well-being of her family. Her words had been simple and straightforward. The emperor was accustomed to meeting all kinds of beauties, but it was highly uncommon that he would encounter such a simple and innocent woman. Thus, he had concealed his identity and conversed with her the entire night. The more they talked, the more he felt that this woman's temperament shone brightly. The next day, he had sent someone to give her the imperial edict of promotion. Now these 3 ladies had moved from insignificant beauties to 4th-rank beauties in just one step. For Shu daughters, this truly was like reaching heaven in one bound. At the moment, among the three ladies, Wang Lianer was the favorite, and the emperor had the least interest in Mu Shiro. Jiang Dan had not received the emperor's summons even after her promotion, but this did not discourage her at all, and she remained very joyful. Jiang Dan's palace servants were all anxious. Hoping that their mistress would gain the emperor's favor, they advised her to think of a way to meet him once again, so that no one would be able to snatch his favor from her. However, for reasons unknown, Jiang Dan continued tending to her own matters each day, seemingly content and unhurried, causing all her palace servants to be beside themselves in helpless worry. Today, Jiang Dan was in the imperial garden viewing flowers. Perhaps weary of looking at flowers, she walked to the pavilion to sit down and rest. Although she seemed tired, her mood suddenly lifted and she tasked her servants to collect the flowers which had fallen to the ground and to see if they could gather some early morning dew, in order that she could brew Baihua 1/6 later. Not content with simply watching her servants work, she gathered her skirt, stood up, and joined the crowd of palace servants. 6. Baihua Jiu, lit. 100-flower wine. Baihua wine is a traditional famous wine in Zhenjiang, Jiangsu, and belongs to the yellow wine category, with sour, sweet, bitter, spicy taste. Its raw materials are brewed with glutinous rice, fine wheat koji, and nearly 100 kinds of wild flowers, which are nutritious and healthy. As she sought happiness in the crowd, she did not notice a man standing at the far end of the garden, closely observing her every move. Zhang Chao lowered his head and spoke to Xianli, who was standing in front of him. "Your Highness has thoroughly thought this through. Is it really her?" With some doubt he continued, "Your Highness, why not choose someone else? Jiang Dan is truly, using her would truly be too risky." Xianli closed his eyes slightly and said slowly, You talk about risk. What is your opinion of her?" Zhang Chao pondered momentarily, seemingly doing his best to remember his interactions with Jiang Dan. Unfortunately, he and this fourth sister had only had a superficial relationship, so he was unable to think of anything. After some time he shook his head and said, "My fourth sister. She was born of a concubine, and was raised at the side of the former foreign from a young age. Her temperament is extremely timid. Ordinarily, loud sounds and speech in the Fu would startle her. She is truly not of much use." He paused, then said, "Moreover, she's not very smart. How did your Highness come to choose her to be our person?" Xianli shook his head and said, "Zhang Chao, do you know why, despite being by my side for so long, you have time and again been unable to achieve a better position, and have been unable to grasp hold of any of the opportunities one have given you? And what's more, you've allowed others to possess those key opportunities." Zhang Chao trembled inwardly, but he said resolutely, "Begging your Highness to give advice. You are sufficiently ruthless, and you do things methodically. And it is such a pity, you are overwhelmingly conceited." Shaking his head, Xianli said, "You have never seriously observed the people around you, to the extent that you look down on them and underestimate them. For example, right now, you are underestimating the person right before you, Jiang Dan. Your Highness, this subordinate does not understand." Zhang Chao said, "Even taking into consideration that my fourth sister has entered the palace as a beauty, that is due to my father's social status and her own good fortune. But she has no ambition. Doesn't your Highness say that a person without ambition is not useful? My fourth sister plainly received the emperor's edict for promotion, but did not know how to use this to fight for her own advancement, and thus wasted the opportunity. As a result, among the three beauties, Wang Lianer and Mu Shiro are more highly favored compared to her." Xianli shook his head. "This is where you are wrong. You only saw Minister Jiang sending Jiang Dan into the palace, but did you not see how much effort Jiang Dan put in? Did you actually think that the encounter between Jiang Dan and Imperial Father was really, as what others have said, a mere coincidence and Jiang Dan's good fortune?" Zhang Chao remained silent. It was not that he had not had his suspicions, but in his heart Jiang Dan had always been useless, so useless to the point that he couldn't have any suspicions about her at all. With Jiang Dan's temperament and skill, or lack thereof, how would she be able to scheme her way to winning over the ruler of the land? "You see, you have only yourself to blame." Xianli sighed and said, "In my opinion, Minister Jiang does an exceptional job of raising his daughters, The Jiang family's eldest miss and fourth miss are truly one in a million. He looked at Jiang Chao with an ambiguous smile while saying, "This fourth sister of yours is a poisonous snake, and I fear she understands silent endurance and dormancy better than you do. Look dash." He nodded in Jiang Dan's direction. Jiang Chao followed his line of sight and saw Jiang Dan laughing with a group of palace maids, looking nothing at all like a palace beauty, nothing at all. His heart jumped as he saw a figure dressed in bright yellow robes making its way unhurriedly from behind Jiang Dan. It was the emperor. Today, the emperor had been casually walking in the garden, when he heard the sound of female laughter from a distance. The sound was as crisp and sweet as that of silver bells, and the second he heard it, he seemed to have been infected by its happiness. His heart was moved, and he deliberately made a loop around the garden to see who the person was. One look rendered him a little stunned. He saw a woman standing among palace maids, a flower basket in one hand, while the other hand was holding a whole crabapple flower which had just dropped off the branch. There was a slight smile on her face, and her eyes were so full of mirth that they were like crescent moons, brightly shining and utterly adorable. She was wearing an embroidered short jacket and skirt in peach, with a jade-green loose coat. The effect was enthrallingly fresh and colorful, with a charm that was distinctive of youth. She presented a dainty appearance, but her every move was uniquely beautiful and charming. And this charm did not seem artificial, but was natural and full of vitality. Even though she was among a crowd of palace maids, she drew attention at one glance. Crabapple description: tree fruit, varieties and facts Britannica. Crabapple flower. The emperor walked forward to ask, "What is your name?" The woman appeared to have received a shock, for she jumped slightly before turning around. She blushed the second she saw the emperor. Perhaps because she had been laughing for some time, drops of perspiration sparkled on her forehead, and she looked truly adorable. She lowered her head, as if somewhat flustered and at a loss as to what to do. After a moment she then said, This concubine is called Jiang Dan. It's you." By her skillful speech, the emperor had already recognized her face. That night, the person who accompanied Zhen in conversation all night was you. The emperor was always busy with affairs of government, and he met far too many beauties every day. Countless numbers of them were exceptionally beautiful and talented, and anyone he selected from within the 3 palaces, 6 courtyards and 72 concubines within his authority would be one of the best. As such, it was very difficult for anyone to make an impression on him. Moreover, the simple and unaffected young woman he had encountered that night had only left a brief, though graceful, trace upon his heart. Once he had raised her rank, he had completely forgotten about her. Meeting her out of the blue today had somewhat taken his breath away. It would be very difficult for the emperor not to pay attention to her at this point. If it could be said that their previous encounter was a mere prelude, then, the Jiang Dan of this time had already left a unique impression on the emperor. This impression was totally different from the impression left by Wang Meiren and Mu Meiren. As the emperor was used to intelligent, literary beauties and cold beauties by now, this brand of charming and lovable vitality would be a breath of fresh air for him. He smiled as he said, "Come, rise and accompany Zhen on a walk." From afar, Xianli raised his eyebrows. "Did you see that? This is your 4th sister's craftiness." Jiang Chao stared incredulously at Jiang Dan, who was walking side by side with the emperor in the distance. Right at that moment, Jiang Dan laughed so adorably and charmingly that even Jiang Chao was astonished at witnessing it. This 4th sister had had only one expression in the Fu, and that was to be terrified and timid. He was baffled by what he had just seen, for this Jiang Dan and the Jiang Dan he saw every day almost seemed to be 2 different people. It's not that she didn't want to fight for it, rather she was biding her time. With a slight smile, Xianli said, "She is an expert in laying dormant until the time is right. If something is not guaranteed, she will not do anything. See for yourself, this Jiang Meiren will be the new favorite very soon." "But," Jiang Chao said as he suppressed the shock he felt, "why would she collude with us?" "Her eyes are full of ambition," Xianli replied. "A person with ambition will not be timid. Jiang Chao, when you are free, spend more time with this 4th sister of yours. She will definitely be tempted because she wants to achieve a higher position. As for us, we need someone who can speak for us in front of Imperial Father." When Imperial Consort Chun was around, Xianli could do anything without impunity. This was because Imperial Consort Chun merely had to whisper to the Emperor during pillow talk, and the Emperor would regard him with a greater degree of tenderness. However, now that Imperial Consort Chun had lost power, the Empress and Imperial Consort Xian would never speak well of him, and so the Emperor had become increasingly distant with him, to the extent that the usually unflappable Xianli had become somewhat anxious. "Yes, Your Highness," Zhang Chao said as he lowered his head. "That Jining Wang and Zhao Guang have been away for more than 2 months, and should be at the battlefield by now. The spies from the front came in to report yesterday that the war situation is now under control. If this is the case, then going forward." He stopped there. The better the war situation at the front, the more unfavorable it was for them. They could not afford to allow Jining Wang this tremendous opportunity to gain great merit. Xiao Xiao had almost made it clear that he would not stand with them at present. Such a person could not be used, and must therefore be destroyed. "No need to worry," Xianli said lightly. "They can't win this battle. They will definitely be defeated, so why give them any attention?" His eyes glinted murderously, and he stroked his sleeves as he said, "Notify Xia Cheng, he can take action." "Your Highness," Zhang Chao said in shock. "So soon? The longer the night, the more dreams there are." 7. Xianli responded with an icy smile. 7 Yi Chongming Duo. Lit. Long night, many dreams. Figure. Long delays give rise to more complications. In the Jining Wangfu, Zhang Ruan was sitting at Xiao Xiao's study table, reading. She had been residing at the Jining Wangfu for 2 months, and the servants there had changed their ways in order to enable her to live comfortably, perhaps even too comfortably, such that she had almost unconsciously become too used to the way of life there. Over the past 2 months she had returned to the Jiangfu to mourn Xia Yan and Jiang Susu in sackcloth, and had also seen the Jiangfu's new foreign Xia Wei, a beautiful woman with a big smile and evil intentions. However, since she was no longer living in the Jiangfu, these matters had nothing to do with her. Xiao Xiao's study was like a treasure trove with all kinds of books, thus Zhang Ruan spent most of her time there. She looked at Xiao Xiao's handwritten notes, which set her mind in a whirl, for clues to some of her long-held suspicions gradually surfaced. Nevertheless, she did not conjecture any further. Everyone had their own secrets, including Xiao Xiao. What seized her attention at present was the war in Tianjin. At this time in her previous life, she had been engaged in an agonizing struggle, and thus didn't care much about the war in Tianjin. The letter she had written Zhang Xinji had contained everything she could remember which might possibly help him. As for the rest, she was truly powerless. However, one thing was certain. It was a given that Xianli would make his move at this time. Now that the Zhao family was in a weakened state and Xiao Xiao was not in the capital, Xianli's natural ability to take advantage of the misfortune of others would not allow him to relinquish this excellent opportunity. The structure of the imperial court and household were at their most vulnerable point, and a slight movement would cause earth-shattering change. She could guess, to a reasonable degree, what Xianli was planning to do. As she was deep in thought, she heard the guard outside the door say, "AI fourth young master. Young foreign is within." A gruff, deep male voice said, "It's all right, I'll just go in and see." Zhang Ruan silently looked at the person who entered as the door was pushed open with a creak. This person had arrived unexpectedly, full of curiosity about the young foreign, who was the center of many rumors. On opening the door, he saw a young lady sitting upright at the study table with the light behind her, looking at him steadily. Her appearance was made somewhat unreal due to the backlight, and her eyes, clear, bright, and brimming with wisdom, seemed to convey a kind of mockery of reality. She was watching him calmly and indifferently. There was something hypnotizing about being watched by those eyes. The new arrival rubbed his nose and coughed before saying, "Third sister-in-law? I am fourth brother Qi, third brother asked me to come." Zhang Ruan's eyes glinted as she assessed the person opposite her. He was also a young man in his 20s, clad in a purple gown embroidered with lotus flowers. He could be said to be handsome, with a bright, honest appearance, apart from the long mustache and beard which he sported. For whatever reason, it was as if a perfectly good-looking young man had been ruined, and it was quite jarring. However, his smile was warm, and his eyes were long, very much like peach blossom eyes. In his gaze there was no sign of frivolity, instead there was uprightness. This was Xiao Xiao's fellow disciple Qifeng, ranked 4th, who had studied the art of politics while on MT Jianan. It was a pity that he had mastered this field, but could not easily bring to fruition what he knew. Over the past few years he had been secretly assisting Xiao Xiao with the genie guard, and now Xiao Xiao had asked him to come back to the capital, which was highly unexpected. Qifeng appraised Zhang Ruan seriously. Abruptly, he smiled and said, "Third sister-in-law is indeed a national beauty. At first, I thought that third brother's recall of fifth brother Xia and myself to the capital to protect third sister-in-law was much ado about nothing. However, upon looking at the situation now, it is fourth brother's i.e. himself good fortune. Guoxi Xiangxiang. National grace, divine fragrance. An outstanding beauty." Chapter 171. Chapter 171. Jiang Xianji's whereabouts. When a tiny butterfly in the capital flaps its wings, it can only set off a small, almost imperceptible wind, but when these intricately connected winds come together, they become a storm of irresistible force many thousands of miles away. Yet no one is aware. Moreover, presently, the minuscule changes in the capital did not seem to have any effect on the battlefield far away. This was a vast and boundless desert. The vegetation was sparse, such that there was hardly any livestock grazing there. Looking over the land, one could see tents pitched by military infantry. Additionally, the tents were covered with thick felt to prevent people from freezing to death at night. Within the unique square-shaped formation the tents were organized in, there was an outlier. It was an extremely luxurious tent to the extent that its top was adorned with thick tassels. Furthermore, the exterior was guarded by no less than 10 armed soldiers. These men's clothes were a little different from those worn in the Great Jin, and there was a palpable sense of their being foreign. While holding a basket, a young girl clad in emerald green walked towards the tent. The armed guards allowed her passage. Her head was lowered throughout, and after entering the tent, she silently placed the basket on the table and lifted out the food. When the dishes had been arranged, she said softly, "Deputy General Jiang, this slave Jiner has newly arrived to serve you. Sir, please come and eat." The young man sitting on the chair within the tent raised his head, revealing his handsome face. His complexion was rather pale, and there was fresh stubble on his chin, but he did not cut a sorry picture at all. On the contrary, there was a special kind of unrestrained confidence that arose from his dire situation. He started slightly on hearing the young girl's voice, and it took him quite a while before he said, "You speak Mandarin. Are you from the Great Jin's capital?" The language of bureaucracy, i.e. Mandarin, so named because it was commonly used in officialdom in the Ming and Qing dynasties. The girl lowered her head and whispered, "This slave is indeed from the Great Jin's capital, but was captured by people from South Xinjiang. They were looking for people to serve master, so they sent this slave here." Jiang Xianji slowly rested his eyes on the girl. She was in the bloom of youth, perhaps 16 or 17 years old. Her skin was delicate, and her eyes were big and lively, but she had a noticeable burn scar on her left cheek which shockingly marred the beauty of her entire face, and caused her to look extremely fearsome. On thinking about it, she could only have been sent to serve this captive precisely because of her disfigurement. Otherwise, if she had been some exquisite, jade-like female, she would have long been ruthlessly ravished by the soldiers. Jiang Xianji narrowed his eyes and said, "You are from the capital. How did you come to be captured and brought here?" Jiner was momentarily stunned. Then she said, "This slave was following the servants from the laundry department of the Great Jin army. A few nights ago, this slave went out with several sisters and just so happened to encounter a pair of soldiers, stragglers, who seized all of us." There was nothing wrong with her statement. There was always a group of womenfolk following behind the marching troops to take care of their daily needs, such as mending and washing their clothes. These women would normally stay somewhere else, and it was naturally not possible for Jiang Xianji to have seen every single one of them. As for going out at night and encountering stragglers, this also was possible. However, after listening to this girl's words, he felt that something was off. Jiang Xianji could not say with clarity what the problem was, and his brows slowly creased into a frown. It had been several months since he had been captured and brought to this location, and he did not know what was happening outside. His captors also treated him with courtesy, as befitting someone of high status. Every day, they laced his tea and food with a neuromuscular blocking drug that caused not only a state of paralysis, but also made him unable to use his internal strength. Yet they did not kill him. He could not figure out what these people were trying to do, but he thought of ways to escape every day. He said, "Since you were captured and brought here a few days ago, you should know how the war is going outside." His captors had isolated him from the outside world, and he had no way of finding out any concrete details of the current war situation. He also did not know the current state of the Great Jin's army. At the time when he was captured, Guanliang Han had also been shot with an arrow that had penetrated deeply, causing an injury that would take some time to heal. The army could not go a day without a commanding officer, so this was a military crisis. General Guan has been seriously injured and can no longer lead the troops in military expeditions, Jiner said softly. The Great Jin army is suffering repeated defeats and is in retreat, while Tianjin is pressing hard, step by step, and has already pushed back the Great Jin army to the Haiguanya region. However, Deputy General Jiang need not be anxious. Today, this slave heard the higher-ups say that the imperial court has already sent reinforcements. Jinying Wang is leading 100,000 genie guards here on the double. Zhang Exanji listened to all this with deeply furrowed brows, and when he heard the last sentence, he could not help but say in shock, "Jinying Wang?" He continued to frown. Since even Xiao Xiao had been sent out, he could see how tense the war situation was now. Xiao Xiao was the carefully hidden strength of the Great Jin, and it was almost as if he had been born just to face up to a certain kind of power, for he was ordinarily a carefully hidden secret. The emperor was especially accommodating towards Xiao Xiao, and there had to be some reason for this. Zhang Exanji was no fool. Having fought alongside Guanliang Han, he could make some guesses as to why. Yet, this carefully hidden secret strength of the Great Jin was now bursting into the public eye in such a grand manner, and was even heading into the battlefield for a fierce confrontation with Tianjin. What had happened to precipitate this? He pondered the matter deeply, but on looking up, realized that Jiner was furtively staring at him. She met his gaze and reacted like a thief who had been caught in the act. Blushing, she quickly lowered her head and refused to look at him any further. Zhang Exanji was acutely aware that although this young lady was ugly, her clothes were plain and common, and although she repeatedly stated that she was a slave, she was clearly not a servant who was used to serving others. On the contrary, she possessed a degree of natural and unforced nobility. For some people, there was no need to affect this air of nobility, least of all those who had been raised in the great noble families of the upper classes. From a young age till adulthood, these people's behavior and bearing would have been influenced by their families, and they would automatically manifest their aristocratic spirit. The young girl before him did not seem like a slave, but like a young miss. Compared to other young ladies, she was a little less haughty, more like a simple, natural, ordinary girl. But the appearance of an ordinary girl in an enemy camp was in itself an abnormal situation. Zhang Exanji said slowly, "Since you have come to serve me, I should inform you that, before you arrived at this tent, there were 3 others who came to serve me. Eventually they all died." Jiner was taken aback, and looked at him uncomprehendingly. Zhang Exanji watched her expression closely as he continued, unhurriedly, "Because they were all spies sent by these people, all thinking of ways to gain my trust through deception, trying to weasel information from me. However, I discovered their trickery and found ways to expose them. Since they had failed in their mission, they were dragged outside by those people and killed. Their deaths were truly tragic. For example, before you arrived, I had just cleaned up the tent because of a corpse." There was a heavy oppression in his tone, and a kind of sharpness that was akin to a finely honed sword being drawn from its scabbard, cutting through the air like golden light appearing unexpectedly from behind the rolling black clouds, bringing with it an irresistible compulsion that caused people to speak the truth. He said, "Miss Jiner, do you still want to stay by my side?" Jiner was dumbfounded by these abruptly spoken words. However, after a moment's pause, she smiled and said, "This slave is here only to serve Deputy General Jiang, and of course wants to stay by Deputy General Zhang's side. If there's nothing else, Deputy General Zhang should eat something first. Zhang Xianji was rather astonished. As he met Jin'er's eyes, he discovered that there was something familiar about them. They were crystal clear and without any hidden secrets, so either her sincerity was heartfelt, or her scheming ran too deep. What he had just said was not false, but neither was it completely true. Admittedly, some of the maidservants were spies from the region, while others were actually from the Great Jin and were willing to risk highly adverse conditions to rescue him from captivity. It was a great pity that in the end they had all died at the hands of these people. As he was speaking, someone entered the tent. He eyed Jin'er but did not ask her to leave, having clearly determined she was of no significance. That person noted Zhang Xianji's frown and laughed before saying, "Deputy General Zhang does not look very happy today. What's up? Are you finding it too stuffy and boring here?" This person was clothed in a gray robe which was wrapped tightly around, revealing only a slender, clean-shaven chin, and thin lips which were beautifully shaped. The voice was that of a young man who sounded notably persuasive for some unknown reason. He asked Deputy General Zhang, "Have you thought about it yet? Your Excellency has no need to waste any time or effort on me." Zhang Xianji replied with a faint smile. "This humble person has nothing Your Excellency could want." The gray-clad person walked forward slowly, in an intimidating manner, although his voice still held a hint of a smile. It was like a bow poised above the last string on a string instrument. There was a sense of itchy anticipation as well as an indescribable apprehension that at the very next moment a high-pitched shriek would sound and the string would snap. The gray-clad person continued, "Deputy General Zhang, why do you need to conceal the truth even now? I only want to know who gave you that letter." That letter was the one which Zhang Ruan had pressed on him when they parted 3 years ago. The letter recorded in meticulous detail some of the tactics which Tianjin would employ in the years of battle with the Great Jin, as well as a few surprise raids, and even some battlefield encounters which had yet to occur, and whether they ended in victory or defeat. This letter had been of great assistance to Zhang Xianji, and he had examined it constantly in the past 3 years, relying on its contents to turn the plans of the enemy forces on themselves, or to entrap them. Time and time again he perfectly undermined the enemy's sneak attacks. Time and again he won decisive victories. However, there had been a traitor among the troops, Guanliang Han's most trusted subordinate. This news was highly unexpected. Even more importantly, that subordinate clearly understood the secrets in the letter, and had been in secret communication with these people for some time. The enemy's scheme had been well calculated. On one hand, his personal safety. On the other hand, the lives of 100,000 troops. Zhang Xianji had no other option but to allow himself to be captured, and Guanliang Han had been severely injured. The contents of that letter had certainly been sufficient enough to drive the enemy mad. Previously, they had exerted all effort to think up some truly horrendous ways to torture Zhang Xianji, but he had never once yielded. Lately they had changed tactics and began to treat him well, like someone of high status, but he had still refused to yield. Zhang Xianji was one who could not be moved by force or persuasion. Over the several months of interaction with these people, they would probably have become very familiar with his temperament. That they chose to continue with the same methods must mean that there was some other objective, but Zhang Xianji could not think of what it might be. However, he was certain of one thing. He absolutely must never divulge Zhang Ruan's name. Sometimes Zhang Xianji also had his doubts about how Zhang Ruan could have known about possible future events. From the time that Zhang Ruan was sent back to the capital from the rural residence, he had already felt that things were a little bizarre. With him, Zhang Ruan had a somewhat apathetic temperament, and was perhaps pretty intelligent, but this prophetic power, as he considered the contents of the letter, and then recalled past events such as the flooding of Bochang Reservoir, he was truly puzzled. Whatever the case, whether Zhang Ruan was a witch or a spirit, she was his Mimi, and he would never do anything to harm her. If these people knew that Zhang Ruan had written the letter, they would undoubtedly think of ways to seize her. The traitor was still with Guanliang Han, and Zhang Ruan could be ambushed in the capital. He had to protect her. "I have already said it many times," Zhang Xianji said while using his index fingers to prop up his head. With a stubbornly set expression he continued, I just picked it up on the road. Perhaps it was the will of heaven. If your excellency must ask, then you might as well ask the heavens. Perhaps it was determined that your Tianjin's destiny is nearing its end, and so the mandate was given to give my great Jean a hand. Since things are such, bearing in mind the sincerity with which you've treated me in the past few days, I would like to mention to your excellency that you might as well comply with the mandate of heaven, and everyone will be happy. Isn't that so? He was such a calm and reserved person, but was now speaking hogwash with perfect earnestness, while assuming an unconcerned attitude. Yet, not only did this not stir up irritation or disgust, it was even immensely amusing, such that people unconsciously gravitated towards him. Jeaner lowered her head to hide the smile that was quietly creeping up her lips. The gray-clad person was not angry. Instead, he stood with his hands behind his back, nodded and said, I agree with your excellency that heaven declares its mandate, but destiny is not determined by heaven. Even if we say that heaven has given the great Jean its warning, in the end, this warning prophecy has dropped into our hands and is ours to shape. So what kind of heavenly mandate is this? Zhang Exinji remained silent for a while before he replied, You are not from Tianjin, you are from South Xinjiang. These people had never discussed matters pertaining to Tianjin, and the soldiers stationed here were not wearing what Tianjin soldiers would normally wear. At first, Zhang Exinji had thought the soldiers were a secret army raised by Tianjin, but he discovered that this was not the case sometime later, and was led to consider that they were from South Xinjiang, the center of many rumors. When the late emperor was alive, South Xinjiang had invaded the Central Plains, and almost claimed the entire territory. Then, the late emperor had personally led his troops into battle and vanquished South Xinjiang, destroying the nation, and the remnants of her people had been deported to the desolate areas at the border of the Great Jin. Zhang Exinji had lived in the capital since birth, and had never had the opportunity to meet any of the South Xinjiang remnants. Now that he had met this person, he felt a faint misgiving. On hearing Zhang Exinji's words, the gray-clad person laughed lightly and raised his chin slightly, describing a mysterious arc in the air. Yes, I'm from South Xinjiang. So what? Everyone under the heavens will belong to South Xinjiang in the end. All the land under the heavens will become ours. Zhang Exinji shook his head and said, If your excellency wants to dream, I won't hinder you. As for your excellency's question, I have already answered. Now, if your excellency has nothing else, you may leave. I want to rest. The gray-clad person did not take offense at Zhang Exinji's words, merely smiling coolly before turning and exiting the tent. Instead, it was Jeaner who watched nervously as he walked away into the distance. Upon exiting Zhang Exinji's tent, the gray-clad person walked in the opposite direction to another tent. This tent did not look gorgeous, and from a distance it was not even as brightly colored as Zhang Exinji's tent. The entire tent was snow-white, and it was only when one entered the tent that one realized that it was constructed of large pieces of snow fox fur sewn together, with no trace of impurity. Looking at it was like looking at the summit of a snow-capped mountain which had remained unchanged for thousands of years, exuding a cold, mystical, perhaps even demonic beauty. There were no guards keeping watch outside the tent. The gray-clad person paused briefly at the entrance before walking in. Amethyst bead curtains hung all around the tent, the top-grade crystals sparkling and translucent, dazzled with a brilliant, pure white light that was almost blinding. The candlelight in the tent was reflected by the sparkling crystals, and the effect was so beautiful. It was like the bejeweled jade palace in the land of the immortals. Upon entry, one stepped into a mysterious and majestic paradise. Within the curtains, an indistinct figure could be seen, seemingly wearing incomparably beautiful red clothes and sitting upright, but unmoving before a guqin. The gray-clad person walked in front of the curtains and bowed slowly, in a manner which revealed utmost deference. Saintess, the gray-clad person said. How is it going? After a while, a sweetly charming female voice was heard from behind the curtains. The sound was extremely graceful and sweet-sounding, much like a ray of sunlight piercing through the very first drole of melted ice from an ageless mountain glacier, bringing with it millennia of indolence and amorous feelings, as well as harboring a kind of innocence and naivety about the world. Hearing these words, one would almost feel oneself drowning in the sensation, and would nearly be unable to resist the urge to tear open the sparkling curtains and see for oneself just how stunningly beautiful and young the person inside was. Yuan Chuan is incompetent. Would Saintess please punish me? The gray-clad person said. Before this lady, this person lowered their aristocratic chin, like a devout believer prostrating himself before the feet of his convictions. Loyally and modestly, he said. He absolutely refuses to say who wrote the letter. It doesn't matter, the voice behind the curtain said lazily, as if the famous beauty was awakening from her indolent state and had just stretched in a leisurely manner. There was a touch of feline coquettishness in the voice as it said, if it were that easy to get him to confess, then he would not be the great Jin's god of war. Hai Ting Chun Shui. Lit. Chinese flowering apple sleeps in spring. Anecdotally, the background for this is a visit by Emperor Ming of Tang to Chunxiang Pavilion. He summoned a concubine who was inebriated and could not rouse herself to greet him properly. His comment on her state was the subject of a poem by Su Dongpa, Su Shi, and a painting by Tang Bohu, depicting a beautiful lady asleep amidst flowers. Saintess, then what should we do now? Should we kill Jiang Xinji? The gray-clad person asked. No, I want to keep him. The great Jin's god of war. Such a great bargaining chip is my gift to him. A burst of uncontrollable joy broke through the woman's voice out of the blue, and the previously charming and melodious sound was immediately enveloped in a sweet mist, making everything seem unreal. The gray-clad person was slightly stunned. It seemed as if he wanted to say something, then thought better of it, simply bowing his head deferentially in humble obedience, just as he had previously. When he sees my gift to him, he will certainly be very happy, the voice behind the curtain continued, as if the previous indolence had completely dissipated in a moment. Now it sounded like a young child who was clueless about the ways of the world, innocent and unaffected, incomparably pure, who was welcoming the person she liked. Yuan Chuan, he will be here soon. The woman's voice seemed to be smiling. I've waited for him for so long, and now I can finally see him again, she said. Chapter 172. Chapter 172. An alliance. The days passed, and finally there was good news from the people stationed at the border. After the Xiao Xiao-led genie guards reached Haiguanya, the troops were once again redeployed and their battle formations changed. Hence, they were able to defend against and push back the Tianjin. After all, with any battle, crucial to success was having a renewed boost of energy. The Tianjin army had continued their attack, even after their victory, but had not anticipated that reinforcements would arrive so quickly. Thus, they suffered great losses, and broke off their siege for the moment. The two armies momentarily reached a stalemate. This was an advantageous situation for the Great Jin soldiers as they won some time to rest and reorganize. On the other front, when Shirong heard that Zhao Guang was leading the Zhao family troops towards them, they hastily retreated beyond the border. Thus, at least for the moment, there was peace and stability. These two events swept away the previously tense atmosphere in the capital, which then resumed its usual appearance of prosperity and happiness. On this day, Lin Zixiang and Wen Fei entered the gate of the Jining Wangfu to visit Zhang Ruan. Steward Lin was naturally happy once again. When the old Jining Wang and his wife were still alive, Jining Wangfei was a very good-natured person, and got along well with many of the officials' wives. Consequently, there was a steady stream of visitors to the Wangfu. Every day, the area outside the main gate came alive with horse carriages from different families pulling up to park there. A manifestation of the warm and vital relationship the hosts had with other families, and of their popularity. After the old Jining Wang and his wife passed on, and with the cold disposition Xiao Xiao possessed, apart from the few female servants in the Fu, it was highly probable that no female had set foot in the Jining Wangfu. After many years of silence, unexpectedly, although Zhang Ruan looked rather indifferent, her interpersonal connections were actually quite good. Thus, she had only resided in the Fu for a short amount of time before her good friends visited her. When Fei and Lin Zixiang could be considered to be young ladies from the capital's more well-known government officials' families, which naturally incited Steward Lin to order the entire household to receive the guests well. After when Fei and Lin Zixiang sat down with Zhang Ruan, When Fei Fei dabbed at the perspiration on her forehead as she remarked, "Ruan Mimi, the servants at the Jining Wangfu all seem to offer you heartfelt obedience. If the servants in my fu would be only half as sensible, I would thank heaven and earth." When Fei Fei was married now into a military commander's family, whose status was on par with her own. However, a new daughter-in-law would always encounter some unfavorable situations upon entering her husband's household. By nature, when Fei Fei was a carefree soul, so she had some trouble managing the servants. One glance at the orderliness of the Jining Wangfu, and the respect that was accorded to Zhang Ruan was all it took for her envy to surface involuntarily. She's highly intelligent, and there's no lack of methods to discipline servants, yet you can't seem to learn them, Lin Zixiang cut in without hesitation. As straightforward as ever, she continued. Moreover, she was born beautiful, and Jining Wang is protective of her. The only thing you know how to do is practice martial arts every day. So how can your husband protect you? When Fei Fei looked up at the sky, pretending not to have heard Lin Zixiang's words, Lin Zixiang turned towards Zhang Ruan and said, "I originally thought that this marriage would not take your interests into consideration, and I was afraid you would suffer many grievances. But, looking at you now, you seem to be enjoying bitterness as if it were something sweet." Anyway, Jining Wang is not in the fu, so you're living comfortably on your own, and can avoid awkward situations. Ganzaruyi. Lit. As sweet as syrup. Idiom from Book of Songs. To endure hardship gladly / a glutton for punishment. Zhang Ruan smiled slightly and did not respond. One could say that Lin Zixiang's temperament was indeed rather unique among the daughters of noble families. Every time she thought about this, Lin Zixiang felt slightly irritated. In her opinion, friends should treat each other with sincerity. Zhao Jin had never said a word to her before this situation blew up, so this indicated that she had never considered Lin Zixiang her friend. Of course, what infuriated Lin Zixiang even more was that Zhao Jin had done something like this for a man. It was a young man dressed in a long robe of blue who seemed to be in no hurry to let go of Wen Fei Fei's hand after helping her up. Instead, he held her hand tightly. Upon seeing this, Lin Zixiang immediately called out in angry indignation, "Where did this pervert come from? Why aren't you letting go of her hand?" Lin Zixiang was really loud, and everyone in the vicinity straightaway turned to look in her direction. That man was also caught off guard by Lin Zixiang's interrogative shout, and blushed on seeing that everyone was watching them. He said, "Miss, you have misunderstood me. I only..." "Let go of your hand." When Lin Zixiang saw that he still had not let go, without hesitation, she walked up to him and shoved him, while supporting Wen Fei Fei herself. Wen Fei Fei was rather dazed and could not process what was happening, so she only said, "Xiang, I'm all right." The blue-robed young man had almost fallen due to Lin Zixiang's shove. At once, he flushed with anger, and the onlookers all pointed their fingers at him when they saw this. He said, "Miss, you have truly misunderstood me. I am Jinling Divine Physician Xiaqing, a doctor, and just now, I only wanted to ascertain what had happened to this foreign." Lin Zixiang sized him up with a glance. This young man could be considered handsome in a delicate way, and he looked fresh and cool in his plain cotton clothes, with a cloth bag at his waist. His skin was quite good, and although at the moment his face was red either from anger or shame, his tone of voice was still absolutely cordial. But, Jinling Divine Physician? Every single person in the medical field who claimed to be a divine physician was old and white-bearded. To assess a doctor, one had to look at his experience, and the older a doctor was, the more abundant his experience. This young man looked to be in his early 20s at best, so how could he be called a divine physician? Surely he could not be any better than the apprentices in the medical halls. Lin Zixiang hated pretentious and self-important people the most. With a frosty expression she said, "Most distinguished sir, this small body, I, a mere woman, lightly pushed you and you almost fell. Who knows if your body is suffering from some kind of unmentionable disease? What Jinling Divine Physician? You can't even cure your own unmentionable disease. I think you're nothing more than a charlatan with a false reputation." Having said this, she could no longer bear to look at Xiaqing. So she helped Wen Fei into the horse carriage and swept off. Xia Qing was rooted to his spot, staring blankly as he inhaled a mouthful of dust raised by the departing horse carriage. The onlookers who had enjoyed the fun left slowly, leaving him transfixed and unmoving. He had lived so many years, and wherever he went, he would receive no lack of respect and praise from others. Families with young ladies, on knowing of his reputation, would show him special favor. But now how had he come to encounter this prickly thorn, who so easily pelted him with rude remarks? Even though he had a good temper at this point, he was so agitated that he was fuming silent while gritting his teeth. She had even insinuated that he had an unmentionable disease. A young lady like that, where did such flabbergasting words even come from? The divine physician Xia Qing's state of mind was absolutely consumed with bafflement, but after shaking his head, he managed to push everything he wanted to say to Lin Zixiang to the back of his mind. He looked at the doors of the Jinying Wangfu and an indescribable resentment welled up within him. If Xiao Xiao had not insisted he stay behind in the capital to be Zhang Ruan's personal physician, he would not have been here, being criticized in front of so many people. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. With a flick of his sleeves, Xia Qing turned and left. In Marquis Xiaofu, Xia Jun brushed the dust off his sleeve and walked out of the courtyard. Just outside, he saw Xia Jiao snatching something from the hand of a maidservant while yelling, "You such a low-class servant, what use do you have for such a good bracelet? And you won't give it to me." That maidservant was not to be outdone, and said Miss Old Furin gave this servant this item. If Miss wants it, it's best to ask Old Furin. Since this belonged to Old Furin, this servant does not dare gift it to someone else. Moreover, Miss is a member of the nobility who has plenty of good things. Is there really a need to lower yourself to fight with a servant? The maidservant's witty and eloquent response infuriated Xia Jiao, who immediately moved to slap her and said, "You dare to talk back? Just who is the master here?" The maidservant dodged Xia Jiao's slap and said, "Miss, you'd better not make things difficult for this servant. If Old Foreign's personal Momo sees Miss, it won't be good and Miss will be punished." Xia Jiao was even more incensed upon hearing this. "Now you even dare to threaten me." The noise of the argument resounded throughout the courtyard. The maidservant looked up to see Xia Jun standing not far off, and called out at once, "This servant sees second young master." When she heard Xia Jun being greeted, Xia Jiao was taken aback and straightaway stilled her actions. Fear showed briefly in her eyes as she realized Xia Jun was nearby, and in a small voice she said, "Second brother." Xia Jun eyed Xia Jiao coldly. Ever since Shen Rou and Xia Tiankai's affair had been exposed, the Xia family had been reduced to the laughingstock of the entire capital. Unfortunately, because of Shen Rou's maiden family, it was not easy to cast her off and send her home. Although she was not treated as badly as someone who was dead, Shen Rou's standing within the Xia family had plummeted. Xia Jiao had become the humiliating reminder of the adultery between the second son of the family and his elder sister-in-law. Xia Foreign had even called Xia Jiao into the ancestral hall, intending for her to down a cup of poisoned wine to end the matter. But Xia Tiankai had somehow received news of what was happening and rushed to rescue Xia Jiao from Xia Foreign's clutches. Unfortunately, even though Xia Jiao's life had been preserved, she could never regain her previous highly favored standing in the Xia family. She was the shame of the Xia family wherever she went, and people would talk about the Xia family scandal because of her. Xia Cheng then confined her to the residence and did not allow her to step foot outside the Fu. Since her reputation had fallen to such lows, naturally, no one was willing to marry her. Not only this, Shen Rou was unable to protect her, Xia Tianyi detested her, and Xia Cheng and his wife spurned her. Life in the Fu for Xia Jiao was a daily struggle, and nothing at all like the life of a young lady. Thus, she had been reduced to the state of fighting with a maidservant for jewelry. Xia Tianyi had already resigned from his official position, and spent every day carousing and drinking outside the Fu, no longer the calm and reserved person he once was. Perhaps he viewed having been made to wear a green hat by his own younger brother as a blow of great significance, for he was now unable to recover from this setback, and seemed to be mired in mud. Yuya had sorted out Shinro, but she was not living the happy life she imagined that she would. Xia Tiankai's unhappiness with her because of this matter was obvious to all. His behavior became increasingly unrestrained and impudent, and he bluntly refused to spend the night in her courtyard. Xia Chong and his wife abhorred her for spreading the scandal and ignoring the good name of the family, and treated her with cold detachment as a result. Thus Yuya became more and more gloomy. Amongst all these people, the one who lived most comfortably day by day was, unexpectedly, Xia Jun. At that time, because of the situation in the ancestral hall, Xia Jun had lost his opportunity to become an official. At first he was very depressed for a period of time, but now, looking back on the situation, it was really not worth mentioning. Every day he watched with cold detachment the absurd goings-on and chaos in the Xiaofu, as if he were an outsider. Xia Jiao had always been afraid of this second brother, but now that her status was not the same as before, she was even more deathly afraid of him. Her stance towards him was one of unabashed submission. Xia Jun smiled and walked past her unhurriedly. As he drew level with her, his sleeve fluttered, and a piece of silver dropped out of it. This was a highly insulting action, something that people would do to a beggar. However, when Xia Jiao saw this, not only did she keep her temper, she also immediately smiled widely, bent down to pick up the silver piece and said, "Many thanks to second brother." After Xia Jun left the Fu, he walked to a tavern on the street and entered without consulting anyone. The tavern manager seemed to be exceedingly familiar with him, and welcomed him into an inner room, where only one person sat at this point in time. That person was wearing blue clothes and sitting at the window pouring himself a drink. The tavern manager exited the room, and that man turned to look at Xia Jun, smiled lightly and said, "Cousin?" It was Zhang Chao. Xia Jun smiled too and walked across to sit opposite Zhang Chao. He poured out a small cup of wine and brought it to his lips, sniffed at it and said, "Contrary to expectation, this is good wine. Elder cousin knows how to appreciate such things. I'm so ashamed of my inferiority. But this is only somewhat appealing to the taste. It's not fit to grace the tabletop. In future, if there is an opportunity, we will enjoy delectable wine, far more excellent than this, without end." When Xia Jun heard this, he downed his cup of wine and said, "For elder cousin to say this, perhaps something good has happened." "Of course it's something good," Zhang Chao said unhurriedly. "In actual fact, it is something extremely good." "Oh." Xia Jun's interest appeared to have been piqued. "What is it?" "Elder cousin has been working under 8th Prince. Have you been promoted yet again?" "That's not it," Zhang Chao answered indifferently. "It's something even more pleasing than a promotion. That is, cousin, there's now an opportunity, and a great probability that we can get rid of our common enemy." Chapter 173. Chapter 173. A Gamble. Xia Jun's eyes darkened, and his eyes betrayed his emotion for a split second. In the blink of an eye, though, he smiled coolly and asked, "Elder cousin, what do you mean?" "Cousin and I both have Xia family blood running through our veins, so we should deal with one another frankly, and there's no need to speak in riddles. Cousin, that you have fallen to such a dire state, unable to enter officialdom, and can only do 8th Highness work in secret without the possibility of ever achieving the official position and honor that is due to you, all of this is thanks to whom?" Zhang Chao laughed and said, "You and I are both well aware of what the answer is." Xia Jun observed Zhang Chao with a slight smile. He and Zhang Chao were not the same. Although Zhang Chao was working for Xianli and his official career seemed to be on the upward trend now at best, Xia Yan had protected him too well because he was not shrewd enough to handle officialdom. Moreover, Zhang Chao had also inherited Zhang Quan's cowardly and fickle temperament, and had on quite a few occasions thought himself pretty clever. For example, from what he had just said, Xia Jun knew without a doubt that Zhang Chao had deliberately spoken those words for him to hear. However, he remained silent. "It is my honor to assist 8th Highness, so I don't dare to complain. As for elder cousin's promotion, that is elder cousin's good fortune. My fortune is not good, and there's no one to blame," Xia Jun said. Zhang Chao closely regarded Xia Jun when he heard these words. Xia Jun was an enigmatic and unfathomable person. While unable to become an official due to the imperial edict, he had unexpectedly become Xian Li's helping hand on the outside. By now Jiang Chao had clearly figured out some of Xian Li's habits, and he never made use of someone who was incompetent. Xia Jun's position had already been special, but for Xian Li to sit up and take notice of him, he must possess great capability. Jiang Chao was a naturally petty and narrow-minded person. Although he viewed interacting with Xia Jun as a taboo, the situation had changed, and he had no other option but to conspire with him. Truth be told, cousin, this meeting is Eighth Highness' idea. Knowing that continuing to play Tai Chi would not be beneficial to him, Jiang Chao decided to speak frankly. He said, Eighth Highness gave me a command, but I feel that we can take this matter further. However, I need cousin's help. De Taiji. To practice Tai Chi figure to avoid responsibility / to pass the buck. Xia Jun leisurely stretched out his hand and poured himself a cup of wine. The wine swirled around lightly, emitting a faintly alluring, intoxicating fragrance. Xia Jun picked up the cup but was in no hurry to drink. Instead, he narrowed his eyes slightly, as if sniffing the light aroma of the wine. Taking his time, he said, "Oh? Then, elder cousin, what benefit do I gain from participating in this? How far can we take this?" He was not anxious to ask what was to be done, or how it was to be done. The first thing he asked about was the endpoint. This made clear that Xia Jun was not the type to be concerned about methods. Whatever the situation, his only requirement was that it had a satisfactory outcome. Jiang Chao lowered his voice, and his expression turned cold briefly. The outcome? That would depend on how much cousin dares to gamble. What if I dare to gamble the entire Xia family? Xia Jun smiled slightly. Astounded, Jiang Chao carefully scrutinized the person before him again. Xia Jun's face was handsome and bright, but there was something melancholic about his eyes. Those eyes gleamed all of a sudden, like a starving wolf on its last legs in the wilderness which had unexpectedly caught sight of prey. There was a kind of crazed excitement. Jiang Chao suppressed his shock with difficulty, for his instincts told him that his cousin was truly someone who had gone insane. Yet, on the surface, he solemnly continued, "Then I promise cousin, after this matter has been concluded, this world will no longer have the General Fu, and neither will it have the Genie Guard. Even more so, it will not have Jiang Ruan and Jiang Xinji, that pair of siblings." He continued, "At that time, I will personally deliver Hong and Junju into cousin S hands. Then whatever cousin wants to do, go ahead and do it." This bargaining chip. It was indeed tempting. Xia Jun pictured a pair of slightly upraised, charming eyes. When those eyes were not looking at someone, they seemed to be veiled behind a thin mist, cold and unperturbed. When looking at someone, they possessed a degree of ridicule, as if sneering at that person's ignorance and puerility, expressing a type of contempt that was enough to seduce a person into insanity. In his life, the first half had been lived in the lap of luxury. Everything was smooth sailing, and he got everything he wanted. However, this state of stable equilibrium was destroyed by Jiang Ruan. Using nothing more than simple stratagem, she brought his splendid life to absolute collapse. Being an official was not really his obsession, but Jiang Ruan had offended his dignity. In his opinion, if he took a fancy to Jiang Ruan, she should have obediently submitted. Who could have imagined that this was no obedient house cat, but a terrifying leopardess who only had to reveal her claws just slightly, and people would have a taste of how awesomely yet ferociously capable she was. Over the past few years, he had observed Jiang Ruan turn from an unfavored daughter who had been cast aside and brought up in the rural residence to the Jiang Fu's eldest daughter whom everyone feared and respected, then from an official's daughter to the Junju whom the Empress Dowager relied upon. He had witnessed her take on and defeat Zhang Li and Jiang Susu, as well as Xia Yan, and he knew that she must have certainly have had a hand in Xia Zhao's situation. He had never met such a woman before, and therefore was greatly interested in her. Such a woman, capable of profound thinking, powerful and tenacious, with a beautiful and alluring appearance and a rotten heart, was exceedingly appetizing to him. But she had dared to reject him, and she had to pay the price she deserved. Jiang Chao's proposal was truly tempting. Something like regret showed in his eyes briefly. If only Jiang Ruan had been willing to cling to him obediently, that would definitely have been great. Unfortunately, he knew what kind of person Jiang Ruan was, and she would never bow her noble head to anyone. Thus he would just have to chop it off. He said, "Elder cousin's proposal is very interesting." Jiang Chao regarded him tensely. The seconds ticked on before he heard Xiajun complete his sentence. "We can give it a try." Only then did Jiang Chao breathe a sigh of relief. Almost absent-mindedly, Xiajun peered into his wine cup and said, "What is elder cousin thinking of doing?" To catch both the genie guard and the General Fu in one fell swoop was clearly no ordinary matter. Now that the Zhao family and the genie guard were both far away at the border, any move against them would necessarily have to be on the battlefield. Jiang Chao's face lit up abruptly with a treacherous smile. He said, "Logistics comes before military maneuvers. Even if the genie guard and the Zhao family are amazingly capable and skilled, they won't be able to endure a lack of equipment and food." Bing Ma Wei Dong Liang Chao Xian Xing. Lit. Before the troops move, fodder and provisions go first. Logistics comes before military maneuvers / an army marches on its stomach. Putting the battle with Shirong aside for the time being, there was a wave of good news from the genie guard. Their morale had improved greatly as several swathes of lost ground had been retaken, one after another. Guan Lianghan's condition had gradually stabilized, and the morale of the Great Jin's troops had also settled. In contrast, the Tianjin troops were no longer bold and fierce. Even with their excellent weapons and tactics, they were unable to recover their losses. To everyone's surprise, they discovered that Jinying Wang Xiao, the man called the rebel by the Great Jin, was actually able to direct his troops with sound tactics. Truly an irresistible force. Qiufeng saw Luoyi. Lit. As the autumn gale sweeps away the fallen leaves. Figure to drive out the old and make a clean sweep. In the face of such troops, the Tianjin army was terror-stricken and suffered defeat after defeat. Xiao Xiao's arrangements were unusual, not at all like wartime strategies, and he repeatedly achieved success almost immediately. Fighting the Tianjin army was no longer like fighting a war, but was more like a one-sided massacre. But even so, the war between Tianjin and the Great Jin was not a matter which could be settled overnight. At that time, in order to hasten their journey, the marching troops had packed as lightly as they could to go into battle, and even the army provisions, rations and fodder they had brought with them were in accordance with the established practice for close combat. The location of their battle against Tianjin was in a desolate desert, without herdsmen or livestock in the vicinity. Thus there was a severe lack of provisions. Moreover, the practice of provisioning one's army with the resources of the occupied territory was only suitable for predatory warfare, where an army plundered the lands it conquered, and this would not be allowed. Furthermore, even if it were allowed, it would be too late to do so. By the established standard of the Great Jin dynasty, the people from the relay stations in the capital would collect the army provisions and transport them together, and the person overseeing this military supply wagon, Zhang Daren, would be responsible for the transport. Zhang Ji had been the chief of this transport unit for many years, and he ensured that the distance traveled and consumption en route were the least possible. Because the army provisions brought along at the start of the war were almost depleted, and the national treasury at present could not afford to allocate too much from the stored provisions, the provisions that were currently being collected were from the common people. Within a short span of time, these army provisions would be quickly sent on their way to the border of Tianjin, and these were what remained of the Great Jin's dwindling reserves. Xiao Xiao had to win the war before these provisions were totally consumed, otherwise, they would run out of provisions and be defeated. In the Jinying Wangfu, Zhang Ruan put down the book in her hand and looked at the young man clad in purple clothes in front of her. He was sitting opposite her, observing her with a beaming smile and leisurely waving the folding fan he carried. If one were to overlook the wispy beard which covered his face that did not match his age, he was a handsome, elegant young nobleman. Unfortunately, because of that beard, what was a confident and easy action became somewhat comical. Qi Feng lived in a large courtyard next to the Jinying Wangfu, which had been arranged for him by Xiao Xiao. Xiaqing lived there with him. If it were not for the fear of setting off rumors and slander since Zhang Ruan lived in the Jinying Wangfu, Xiao Xiao would have arranged for the two of them to stay there, too. At present, even though Qi Feng and Xia Qing did not reside in the Jining Wangfu, only a wall separated the two residences, so they were very close by. Third sister-in-law, Qi Feng said as he waved his fan, "You have specially called me over, what are your orders?" Qi Feng cut a highly distinguished figure, but there was suspicion in his eyes. He resided at Baizhonglu all year round, was cold to matters of the imperial court, and usually kept himself hidden. He was not very clear about the goings-on in the Great Jin's inner palace and the women therein, and thus was also uncertain about Zhang Ruan. This time, en route to the capital, he had found out several things about Zhang Ruan's past and present from others. Where the assessment of Zhang Ruan was concerned, Guan Lianghan found her resourceful and full of stratagems, Emo Tsong found her vicious and merciless, and as for Xiao Xiao, well, anyone who could cause Xiao Xiao to be so lovingly protective must be no ordinary person. Qi Feng was not disdainful of Zhang Ruan, but he felt that, no matter how intelligent, she was still a woman, and women were always a little bit whimsical and prone to fantasies. His heart trembling under the weight of her gaze, Qi Feng heard her continue, "What I want to say is, the hostility which Jiang Chao and the Xia family have for me is merely for appearance's sake. Jiang Chao and the Xia family are doing 8th Prince, Xian Li's work, and Xiao Xiao has already become a thorn in Xian Li's side. Since Xiao Xiao is unwilling to cooperate with Xian Li, and his power and influence is beyond Xian Li's control, Xian Li only has one choice: to kill." As Zhang Ruan spoke of such secret happenings, she appeared totally serene, as if she was not speaking of major events to do with seizing the throne and beheading, but merely discussing the state of the weather. Qi Feng's expression had grown rigid. He heard Zhang Ruan indifferently and serenely continue from opposite him, "Thus on the surface it looks like Jiang Chao and Xia Jun want to go against me, but in truth it is Xian Li who wants to deal with Xiao Xiao. Or to put it another way, Xian Li wants to deal with the genie guard. Do you understand what I'm saying?" "You?" Zhang Ruan's words were so blunt that Qi Feng had absolutely no idea how to respond. He suddenly felt that Zhang Ruan was truly suitable for Xiao Xiao. Zhang Ruan looked to be someone who was incredibly calm and capable of preserving the accomplishments of previous generations, but her offensive power was quietly concealed. From her eyes, Qi Feng could discern strength and tenacity. "I understand Xian Li very well. He will use every single opportunity, especially at this critical juncture. Now that Xiao Xiao has left the capital, and only Zhao Yi and a few others remain in the general Fu, this is the best opportunity. Xian Li will certainly think of all ways and means to make things happen." She looked at the book in front of her and said, "I sent the secret bodyguard Xiao Xiao gave me to monitor Jiang Chao. Jiang Chao met Xia Jun a few days ago. They have forged an alliance?" Qi Feng asked. "The Xia family is no longer what it was. How could they dare to act rashly? The Xia family naturally dares not. Unfortunately, Xia Jun is a lunatic." Coolly, Zhang Ruan continued. "Recently, Zhang Ji, head of the military supply wagon, seems to have been exceedingly industrious, and he has also been very liberal in spending money. All at once, he has purchased 3 huge houses and 5 stores in the east of the capital, and he has stored a considerable number of silver banknotes in 4C's private bank. Young Master Qi, in your opinion, isn't this highly odd?" Qinzhuang, old-style money shop, a type of private bank that first appeared in the Ming Dynasty, flourished in the Qing, and was phased out after 1949, informal financial company, often operating at the edges of what is legal. Zhangji. Qi Feng's expression turned severe. He had studied the art of court politics, so he was naturally very familiar with the ministers of the imperial court. Zhang Ji had been in charge of the military supply wagon for a long time. He conducted himself in an upright manner, was very talented, and had transported army provisions for so many years without error. Zhang Ruan's words clearly indicated that she suspected Zhang Ji. On one hand, Qi Feng felt amazed, and on the other hand he thought it was unbelievable. Zhang Darren is a good official. If the water is too clear, there will be no fish. This silver currency may not have anything to do with Xian Li. Provisions and fodder for the troops and horses is a major undertaking. Zhang Darren is not going to destroy his own future. He knows that if anything goes wrong, he is the first person that His Majesty will blame. He is indeed a good official, but it's such a pity that he has a disreputable son, Zhang Ruan said coldly. His 3 sons are all relatively talented and handsome young men. How could you say they are disreputable? Qi Feng asked as he furrowed his brows. Zhang Ji has a mistress whom he dotes on. She has a son who spends all day drinking and carousing outside. Zhang Ji's foreign is Marquis Mu Yang's daughter, a formidable lady. Zhang Ji does not dare to tell his foreign about his mistress and her son, but he can't support the way his son spends money like water. Those houses and shops on the eastern side of the capital, even the silver currency, are all in preparation for that son. I believe young Master Qi also knows how much Zhang Darren loves his sons. For the sake of some money to place your future at stake, to gamble your entire family's lives, smart people wouldn't do this. Zhang Ruan smiled faintly as she said, indeed, if it were merely for some money, he would definitely not find it worthwhile. However, what if, because of this, his career soared to meteoric heights? He would no longer have to do things in order to please his foreign's family, the Marquis Wu family. He would be able to show his magnanimous spirit in welcoming his dearly loved illegitimate son into the Fu, and he might even be able to obtain future prospects for that son. Do you think this gamble is worth the risk? Qi Feng was astounded. Zhang Ruan continued coldly, who doesn't want to gamble if the stakes include boundless riches and glory? What's more, what if one wins the gamble? The world will change. The emperor will no longer be the emperor, the imperial court will no longer be the imperial court, so who will be left to investigate and accuse someone of deceiving the emperor? Slowly, word by emphatic word, she said. The weight of the criminal charge is only borne by the one who loses. However, no one knows yet who will emerge victorious to seize the kingdom. Therefore he dares to gamble. Chapter 174. Chapter 174. Helping others put on a show. Qi Feng sucked in a mouthful of cold air. Zhang Ruan's words had totally flabbergasted him. However, what was even more astonishing was her demeanor and expression when she uttered those words, because they embodied an inexplicable sense of ruthlessness and evil maleficence. Suddenly he realized that Mo Tsong's description of Zhang Ruan as a poisonous woman was not even close to describing her. Her heart was more than capable of ruthlessness, but most importantly, she had greater gumption and had the audacity to exact her ruthlessness. No young lady would dare to speak such audacious and anarchistic words, except for her who had not only spoken them out loud but also with self-confidence. Throughout history, in the fight for the throne, the winner became the emperor while the loser became the evil traitor. This had always been the undeniable truth, yet no one would have dared to speak about it so blatantly. After a pensive moment, he responded, even if he had the guts to do it, there is no way to escape the attention from all the eyes that are around the capital. Should anything happen to the military provisions, and if they were held up before leaving the capital, then the whole debacle would unravel. Zhang Ji would definitely not have a good ending. Moreover, 8th Prince is not stupid. There is no way he would make use of such a foolhardy plan that would so easily be exposed and used against him. Zhang Ruan smiled faintly. Xianli is a very mistrustful and paranoid person, so naturally he won't utilize such a flawed scheme. As such, any tampering of the military provisions would not be noticed nor raise any suspicion within the 10-li distance after it departed from the capital via the main road. At this point, he would start his show and it would be highly entertaining to watch him work to obtain his main objective, gaining the emperor's trust. You, Qi Feng narrowed his eyes slightly, seemed to understand 8th Prince quite well. Zhang Ruan's words appeared to show a kind of familiarity towards 8th Prince, and this in turn caused a strange and weird feeling to skitter across Qi Feng's heart. How could a virtuous young lady have the opportunity to meet and establish familiarity with Xianli? Even with her status as a Junju within the imperial palace, her level of apperception of the person's character and motives to the point of being able to anticipate his next move. Such first-hand knowledge could only have been possible only if they were constantly in each other's company and were in an intimate relationship. A conjecture fleetingly flashed across Qi Feng's heart. Could it be that Jiang Ruan liked Xianli because only when someone likes another would they take notice of what that person does, what they think, and would have a good grasp of their every move and action? However, when Qi Feng took stock of Jiang Ruan's expression, he mentally shook his head. Jiang Ruan's eyes were tepid and calm, her smile affable, but what was missing was affection. What she had done and her tone of voice definitely didn't reflect any interest towards Xianli. This certainly caused Qi Feng to be in a quandary. Know your enemy and know yourself, and you can fight 100 battles without disaster. Jiang Ruan had taken note of Qi Feng's misgivings and smiled. Sooner or later, the Jinying Wangfu will have to face 8th Prince. And since the stance for both is a fight to the end, naturally it is imperative to make advance preparation. Otherwise we would be taken for fools. Furthermore, it would be detrimental to wait until we found ourselves in a life and death situation. She said all this in a quiet whisper, but Qi Feng seemed to have awakened from his stupor at the underlying antagonism behind her words. And yet, on the surface her face was still exquisitely beautiful. Her eyes were gentle and calm. It was almost as if he had imagined the whole scene. Zijizibi by Zambadai. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Even if Xianli intends to fight for the crown and usurp the throne, such an undertaking isn't that easy to obtain. Loftily Qi Feng sneered. In this world, there are still people that he wouldn't dare offend. Third sister-in-law might just be overly concerned, but I can guarantee, he would not have the courage to meddle with the Jinying Wangfu. The smile on Jiang Ruan's face gradually congealed and turned frosty. Naturally, Qi Feng was experienced and knowledgeable on the art of politics, and these skills were sufficient enough to be used for certain political scuffles to obtain good outcomes. Unfortunately, Qi Feng also had a weakness, which was his inability to read and undermine the hearts of others. His point of view on the situation indicated that he regarded Xianli as a politician and based his assessment of his XL modus operandi as merely an uprising prince. Except, Xianli's conduct was not that of a steadfast, headstrong prince. Jiang Ruan had watched Xianli, and had concluded that he was self-centered and cunning and a person adept at covertly forbearing for ultimate gain. This was a man capable of using whatever or whoever he deemed useful, including opportune situations. She had accompanied this man for so many years, and her understanding of his character was almost engraved on her very bones. Qi Feng's knowledge could not even be compared to her. "Young Master Qi, are you willing to help me?" Jiang Ruan stoically asked. Qi Feng was taken aback. He came to the sudden realization that in the face of Jiang Ruan's short and succinct speech, he had in fact wavered somewhat in his conviction. Jiang Ruan's words had indeed impacted him to some degree. Knitting his brows, he said, "My relationship with third brother has always been to rejoice in the good and share the burden in the bad. So anything to do with third brother, I am duty-bound to honor it. Third sister-in-law," he slowly continued, "regarding this matter, we must not alert the enemy. How about we have one of the hidden guards continue their surveillance on Zhangji, and also arrange for others to monitor both the Xiafu and the Jiangfu while we consider at length before making a decision. At the least we have to come up with a foolproof plan to thwart their plans. Suanju Suan Rongju Rong. To be closely connected such that when one suffers damage, everyone suffers damage, and when one prospers, everyone prospers. Why should we hinder their plans?" Jiang Ruan flippantly questioned. Qi Feng was stupefied and he looked puzzledly at her. "What do you mean by that?" "In this world there are two kinds of suffering: to have no one to share in one's success, or to have suffered a great grievance yet unable to speak of it. Since Xia Jun and Jiang Chao are determined to do right by this mission, then I'll let them both eat the bitter fruit of loss and yet be unable to speak of it whatsoever. In your art of politics, young Master Qi is used to fair and aboveboard means in dealing with matters, but I feel that there are times when covert maneuvers are more convenient when dealing with such matters. This time I want them to pay the price for their actions." Qi Feng could not help but be stunned, frozen in his place by that mesmerizing pair of eyes that had suddenly flashed with a chilling frost. Yet he felt that when this lovely young lady turned ruthless, There was a kind of forceful coercive charisma that seemed to blossom. He had never met such a lady before, and could not resist sighing deeply. So what does third sister-in-law think we should do? Zhang Ruan smiled at him. I know that young Master Qi has a special identity within the imperial court, and very soon 8th Prince will definitely want to put on a big play. For this play, I will need young Master Qi to arrange for a few people to join in and play along. In this way we can have some fun. He has even told you about this? Qi Feng was yet again floored and could only laugh bitterly. So be it. After all, you are young foreign of the Jining Wangfu, and informing you about it is indeed understandable. Requesting third sister-in-law to please continue to give us your kind consideration in the future. And regarding this, please continue to give your comments and pointers. Zhang Ruan lightly nodded her head as a trace of coldness flashed across her eyes. In the palace, the empress was hosting tea with a company of several beautiful women at Yu Hua Yuan. The courtyard was filled with many concubines, each of them graceful and courtly, with the exception to the main host, the empress. Even though she was arrayed in her splendid majestic outfit, it was still unable to disguise her aged pallor. The crown prince had gradually been losing favor with the emperor, and while the emperor had not issued the edict to have the crown prince stripped of his status, it was quite obvious that none of the important matters of the court included him. Whereas 8th Prince and 5th Prince were active participants, and this was sufficient enough to cause many factions that were still waiting to decide their alliance to each take note of these subtle tensions. Initially there had still been a group that was neutral in their stance, however. Surreptitiously several among them had begun to forge alliance with either 8th Prince or 5th Prince. Meanwhile, the Crown Prince's people were few. Consequently, the assembly of imperial court officials were very much in the know, in that the mantle of future heir of Great Jin did not rest upon the Crown Prince. Currently, their eyes were fixed on the rivalry between 8th Prince and 5th Prince to see who was more capable. Sitting beside the Empress was Wang Lianer and none other than Zhang Dan. Wang Lianer was dressed in a palace attire of pink silk muslin with a tapered waist. This ensemble emphasized her naturally fair milky white complexion. She was beautiful and her every action spoke of a very innate gentle and soft elegance in her comportment, in addition to a slight hint of a scholarly allure. As a young lady of the Hanlin family, she was worthy of the title bestowed as an accomplished and talented lady. Currently she was one of the favored flowers by the emperor's side, obtaining his pleasure and favor. Zhang Dan wore a jade green dress and based on appearance, she could not be compared to Wang Lianer. Just by looking at her comportment and disposition, she wasn't as gentle and easy-mannered as her. However, in contrast to Wang Lianer, Zhang Dan had that refreshing and invigorating vivacious disposition that elevated her to be the most popular and sought-after consort within the palace. Even the empress could not find it in herself to hold her JD in contempt. She conducted herself with a kind of innocence. She was kind towards the palace servants and she did not make any attempts to vie for the emperor's favor. As such, compared to Wang Lianer, everyone in the palace was very fond of her. Currently she was also often seen by the emperor's side, occasionally saying things that would delight the emperor into laughter. And so the emperor highly regarded her. Today Mu Shiro did not make an appearance. She had a haughty disposition and was cold and detached, and thus could not be bothered to mingle and socialize with the palace consorts. It was just like Imperial Consort Xian, who ever since Imperial Consort Chan and Imperial Consort Shu's fall from grace, had secluded herself in an abstemious life. It was precisely because the power struggle between 5th Prince and 8th Prince was getting more intense that she felt the need to wisely withdraw in the face of such overwhelming odds, as she could not afford to act proud or have her ego inflated just because she was favored. What remained were the low-ranked beauties who had just entered the palace, and among these beauties, there was no shortage of vibrant, vivacious or beautiful talented young ladies. However, until now from those newly arrived beauties, there were only 3 who were most favored. A mild sense of weariness appeared on the Empress' face as she said, "The weather is getting colder and colder." Indeed, it had been getting colder and colder. This was only the beginning of winter, yet every day the changing winds were gradually becoming stronger. Wang Lianer smiled in reply. "It is so, however, The weather in the capital can still be considered to be rather warm, as I have heard that snowflakes the size of a piece of paper have started to fall at Tianjin. I'm pretty sure it is extremely cold there." The Empress glanced at Wang Lianer, noting the underlying meaning her words had revealed, that the Emperor was extremely fond of her, otherwise he would not confide in her regarding the situation at the border. Immediately her Empress' disposition became cold and detached as she said, "That is so true, and especially for all of those generals and soldiers braving the harsh bitter cold. It must really be hard on them." "What the Empress has said is accurate." Zhang Dan smiled as she continued. "The great Jin dynasty and its land has to depend on these generals and soldiers to defend them. The Emperor is favored and blessed with longevity and prosperity, so we will indeed be victorious in this battle against Tianjin. When these generals and soldiers make their triumphant return from battle, it will be an exceptionally grand scene to behold. Yet at the mere thought of soldiers having to suffer such hardships, this concubine feels rather ashamed of herself for being so extravagant and self-indulgent. This concubine is willing to donate some silver and jewelries to exchange for some provisions and supplies to be sent to the borders. This way, my heart will be at peace knowing that I have made a contribution to the cause." The Empress was astonished when she heard Zhang Dan's speech, and she couldn't help the look of appreciation when she gazed at her JD. As the mother of the nation, no matter what her attitude was towards whatever that was happening in the imperial court, her biggest hope was that the Great Jin would continue as a prosperous and thriving nation. Naturally, she hoped that they would be victorious in the war against the nation of Tianjin. However, everyone was well aware that this was no easy feat, especially now when the military provisions and supplies were scarce. Therefore, it was not an easy undertaking for Zhang Dan to take the initiative to donate towards provisions and supplies. As one of the new consorts in the palace, Zhang Dan would not be able to donate much, but once word of this matter spread out, other consorts would follow suit, the court officials would also follow, and finally the culmination of everyone's donation would actually be quite a sizable amount to be donated towards buying military provisions and supplies. Moreover, Zhang Dan could have mentioned this matter directly to the Emperor, and yet, she had raised this matter before the Empress. This in turn clearly suggested that she was not vying for the Emperor's favor, and as such, the Empress was put at ease. Hence the Empress softened her disposition and expression towards Zhang Dan. "Your consideration is exceptional, and I will indeed bring this matter before His Majesty." The Empress' words were very much an indication that she was showing great regard for Zhang Dan. Zhang Dan smiled. "Many thanks, Empress. This concubine is not able to do much. As such, I can only offer a feeble effort." The other consorts gathered around her were either casting envious looks or admiring glances at Zhang Dan. There was a slight change in Wang Lianer's expression as well, but a split second later, it returned to normal, almost as if nothing had happened, as she too smiled. Later, after the Empress had called for everyone to be dismissed, Zhang Dan returned to her own courtyard. Her personal maid Wanner delivered a letter to her, quietly whispering, "Miss, a letter has been delivered." Zhang Dan entered her room and had the other palace maids dismissed before opening the letter. Upon perusing the contents of the letter, there was a moment of surprise before she rapidly read the rest of the letter. After she had set it aside, she pondered over it for a moment before a slow smile appeared on her face. Within the next 3 days, the wagons carrying the military provisions were to set out. After Zhang Dan's suggestion to make donations, all the palace consorts, not to be outdone, had donated their own jewelry. Since the palace womenfolk had come together to make such a united contribution, naturally the court officials could not be remiss in their duty. Therein, everyone within the imperial court more or less donated some silver, and all these silver combined came to be quite a substantial amount. Presently the war had exhausted a huge amount of silver from the national treasury to the degree that the provisions were vastly depleted. Consequently, these donations would ease the desperate lack of military provisions and supplies. The Emperor's heart was overjoyed, and his favor towards Zhang Dan increased. Every day Zhang Ji was busy raising funds to buy provisions and planning delivery routes. Xian Li's eyes dimmed. There is a great animosity between Zhang Ruan and herself. Animosity? Zhang Chao was doubtful. She has never done anything untoward Zhang Ruan when she was at the Jiangfu. Moreover, she was personally raised by Zhang Ruan's mother. From where does their animosity come about? Xianli laughed sarcastically but did not reply. There were some things that Zhang Chao was not privy to, but it was not something that he was not able to find out on his own. Zhao Mei's cause of death, Xia Yan's initial cautious entry into the Fu, was because she had borrowed Zhang Dan's hand. When he had initially obtained the information, Xianli was somewhat confounded because regardless, back then Zhang Dan was merely a little child, yet she did not hesitate to execute her own adoptive mother. But it was because of this point that one could infer that Zhang Dan was innately ruthless and vicious like a wolf in sheep's clothing. If he didn't utilize such a brilliant chess piece, then that would really be a shame. If Zhang Dan had not had such a deep-seated hatred that possibly resulted in her poisoning Zhao Mei in future, even if she was properly used, without a good enough reason she might not be such a big help. Thus, the issue at hand was to figure out what was the best situation to use her for. Zhang Chao was bold but not astute, so he had no intention to keep him in the loop. When Zhang Chao beheld the emperor, the host of scholarly and military officials were divided into two factions. One faction was determined that Zhang Ji be severely punished for misappropriation of military provisions, while the other faction believed that Zhang Ji had been made a scapegoat and was entirely innocent. Everyone knew that Zhang Ji's eldest son Zhang Ming was a close friend of Xianli, so once he entered, everyone cast their eyes towards Xianli regardless of if they were feeling indignant from the injustice or rejoicing at the other's misfortune. When they looked at Xianli, their thoughts were deflected by his calm and soothing expression. It was almost as if all the situations in the world were not able to shake his tranquility. Xianhua gazed frostily as Xianli came forward, and a sneer was formed on his lips. Just then, a court official bowed as he beseeched, "Your Majesty, Zhang Ji has not put into consideration anyone beneath him, and he has disregarded the life and death of tens of thousands of soldiers for his own greed. Moreover, he has cast aside all the benevolence the great Jin had bestowed on him. This is really a reprehensible crime." There is some discrepancy in what official Wang has said. Zhang Ji has been in charge of the transportation for military provisions for many years, so how could he have made such a mistake? This minister certainly cannot believe that he would do such a thing. So this is definitely at the instigation of some miscreant, another senior official added. Instigation? Zhang Darren has been an official for many years, who would likely be able to frame him. This must really be the result of malicious slander and false reporting. Yet another voice said, carrying a sense of hidden motives. I have heard that Zhang Darren's 3 sons are getting more and more prosperous. Such words seemed to be embedded with innuendos that were aimed at Xianli. Those words were rather strange indeed, as Zhang Ji was presently well known and was not lacking in wealth or possessions, so if perchance someone had promised him something in exchange for him to make such a big blunder, then the promised item must definitely be bountiful. What promise under heavens could possibly motivate a person to make such a drastic move? Additionally, when one considered the relationship between Zhang Ji's son and Xianli, it was almost impossible for others not to speculate if there were any dubious transactions occurring. The emperor looked profoundly at the host of court officials. This was merely a matter regarding Zhang Ji, yet the court had become obviously divided. How was it that even he could not be aware that presently they no longer saw him as the emperor and head of the state, but seriously thought that he was getting on with age? Should any mishap befall on him, they would not hesitate, and even before he could issue the edict, the nation would immediately have a change of head of state. Eunuch Li took notice of the emperor's pallor, and internally sighed. The internal strife between the princes was getting more and more intense, to the point that their hidden motives were no longer hidden. But who actually knew the heart of the emperor? Furthermore, that person? Eunuch Li began to have some misgivings. Today's matter regarding Zhang Ji was rather peculiar. Normally, before the matter had been thoroughly investigated, most of these court officials would be like a snake lying in wait as they observed the case development, and certainly wouldn't respond with such urgency. Moreover, it ought to be until Zhang Ji's crime was established with evidence finding him guilty or innocent before any discussion would happen. Today's proceeding was utterly bizarre. What they could not have known was that these court officials had arrived at their viewpoints much earlier after being informed. Furthermore, everyone had assumed that the information they had received was the most accurate. Therefore, the current discourse was merely to stand by their firm beliefs that the intel that they had obtained was true, and the side they were on would definitely win. A confident but pleased look flashed across Xianhua's face, to which Xianli had taken note of and thought rather amusing. Xianhua was too impatient. After all these years, Xianhua had relied solely on the directives of Imperial Consort Xian, and had survived the perils of the palace to stand securely at his current position. But unfortunately, his impatient personality had not changed a single bit. If it was like in the past, such a debacle would indeed result in the emperor's hostility. Like all monarchs, they were highly suspicious by nature, and the more the situation was not favorable towards Xianli, the more the emperor would be predisposed towards trusting Xianli naturally. Should anything happen to Zhangji, then the most obvious and suspicious possibility for anyone to implicate him, Zhangji, would be Xianli. The more Xianli postured himself as inferior and at a disadvantage, the more the condemnation and accusation would worsen, and contrarily the emperor would become more undecided. That's because Xianli appeared to be without help and solitary against the hordes, and people were known to have compassion towards the weak. The same can be said of the emperor, as this was a natural human behavior. But then again, a sliver of doubt streaked across Xianli's eyes as the proceedings of the day had transpired too smoothly. Things were proceeding so successfully that a strange sensation erupted within his heart, almost as if it wasn't supposed to be quite like this. Back when they had Zhang Dan release the information, it was only to some specific people, but those speaking out today weren't those who were part of the plan. Actually, these people were helping push his agenda forward, making his plans very successful. However, when something becomes too successful, a person can't help being skeptical. Eighth Prince, what do you make of the situation? The emperor finally posed a question as his eyes seemed to be like a sharp sword piercing Xianli. It was almost as if should Xianli utter the wrong word, on the stop he would immediately be met with bloodshed. Justice resides in the heart of man, Xianli tepidly replied, and I believe that Imperial Father has already made some conclusions. Your humble son believes in Imperial Father and trusts Imperial Father's subjects. So we will just have to await the conclusion of the investigation, and hear the result before making an informed judgment. From his speech he had clearly stated his standpoint, in that he believed that Zhangji was innocent, yet he further emphasized his trust in the emperor's subjects, and that was taking it beyond context. The emperor's expression softened a bit in seeing Xianli's stance. He could not help feeling a sense of relief. Xianhua took all this into account and his lips curled upwards. This was merely a deathbed power struggle, and today it was most definitely Xianli's day to die. Just at that moment, the military officer assigned to investigate the matter had returned to give his report. With large strides he entered and knelt down to give his report. Reporting to Your Majesty, your subject has been assigned to investigate the issue of embezzlement of military provisions, and thus hereby reports that all the provisions are accounted for, and there is nothing missing. Xianhua's smile went rigid just as he heard Zhangji furiously bellow from outside. Your Majesty, this old official has been wronged. You're tuning into the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.